Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened the Rinnegan in One Piece and got married to Nico Robin? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Eye of the Storm. The new world had a pulse. It was a wild, erratic heartbeat that thrummed through the keel of the Thousand Sunny, a rhythm of chaos that Nami had learned to read in the shiver of her log. Pose's needle and the unnatural colors of the twilight sky. Tonight, the sky was a bruised plum streaked with veins of sickly green, and the sea, instead of cresting into whitecaps, swelled in oily, silent undulations like a sleeping giant's breath. Luffy was perched on the head of the Sunny, his laughter pealing across the strange water as he tried to catch phosphorescent fish that leapt in shimmering arcs, their bodies dissolving into light before they hit the waves. Usopp was beside him, regaling Chopper with a wildly fabricated tale of the time he'd wrestled a Leviathan king whose whiskers were made of pure sea stone. Sanji was in his galley, the clatter of his knives and the fragrant aroma of seasoned sea king a comforting anchor of normalcy in the disquieting seascape. On the upper deck, Zoro was asleep, his three swords resting against the railing, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm far steadier than the ocean's. Frankie was below, tinkering with a new, cannon design, his hammering a distant, metallic counterpoint to the creak of the ship's timbers. And in the library, nestled in the warm glow of a desk lamp, Nico Robin sat surrounded by books. A half-empty cup of coffee cooled beside her as she gently traced the rubbings of a poneglyph they had found on their last island. The ancient script was a language of ghosts, a conversation across 800 years. And she was its sole living participant. A faint smile touched her lips. Here, on this ship, with this impossible crew, the ghosts were quiet. The ever-present dread of being the world's most wanted fugitive had receded to a dull ache. A scar rather than an open wound. She felt safe. It was the silence that came first. Luffy's laughter cut off mid-peal. Usopp's grand tale choked in his throat. Even the distant clang of Frankie's hammer ceased. The only sound was the languid slosh of water against the hull. "Hey," Luffy said, his voice strangely small. "The glowy fish are gone." Chopper, his fur bristled, scampered back from the railing. "Luffy, I feel weird. Kinda heavy." On the deck, Zoro's eyes snapped open. He didn't reach for his swords. He pushed himself to his feet, his body coiled like a spring, his gaze sweeping the unnervingly placid water. Sanji burst from the galley, a smoking cigarette clamped between his teeth, his polished shoes silent on the grass deck. "What's going on? It's too quiet." Nami was staring at her log pose. All three needles were spinning violently, not with the usual frenetic energy of the new world, but in a tight, frantic circle as if trying to escape their glass prison. "Something's wrong," she breathed. "Something is blocking everything." Then, they came. They didn't climb aboard. They rose from the sea. Figures cloaked in matte black material that swallowed the light. Their forms sleek and featureless save for the blank, obsidian masks covering their faces. Water streamed from them, yet they made no sound. No splash, no drip. There were a dozen of them, landing on the deck with the weightless grace of falling leaves. They held no swords, no guns. They were simply there, an assembly of voids that had materialized from the deep. "Who the hell are you guys?" Luffy yelled, his initial confusion already boiling into indignation. He stretched his arm back, his fist swelling. "Gomu Gomu no." His arm snapped forward, but the punch felt wrong. It was sluggish, lacking its usual whip-crack speed. One of the figures simply sidestepped it, the wind from the blow ruffling its cloak. Luffy stared at his hand, flexing his fingers. "What the?" Zoro was already moving, Shisui drawn. He lunged at the nearest figure, a blur of green and steel. Three-sword style, his blades met not flesh, but an unnerving resistance, as if he were cutting through dense, heavy air. The masked assassin didn't even flinch, its hand darting out to slap the flat of his blade, the impact jarring him with unexpected force. Zoro's eyes widened. The man's strength was abnormal. But more than that, his own body felt dull. The fire of his spirit, the edge of his haki, felt muffled. Diabol Hambi. Sanji's leg ignited, a swirl of incandescent flame. He cartwheeled through the air. His kick aimed at another figure's head. But as his foot neared its target, the flames sputtered and died, leaving only a trail of black smoke. The kick connected with a dull thud, and the assassin caught his ankle in a vice-like grip, swinging him into the ship's mast with brutal force. Sanji crumpled, gasping, his legs screaming in protest. Panic began to set in. Frankie came charging up from below. "What's the deal, you unsuper intruders?" He struck a pose. Strong right. His fist rocketed forward, but halfway to its target, it hissed and slowed, steam pouring from its joints as if its power was being actively drained. The assassins moved with a singular, terrifying purpose. They ignored Luffy's flailing punches, sidestepped Zoro's hampered slashes, and shoved aside a panicked Usopp. They were a tide of black, flowing across the deck, their destination clear. The library. Robin's blood ran cold. She had heard the commotion, the choked-off attacks. She knew that silence. It was the silence of fear. The silence of hunters who had found their prey. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the creeping stillness. "It's me. They're here for me." The door to the library splintered inwards. Two of the black-clad figures stood in the doorway, their masked faces fixed on her. The lamp on her desk flickered and died, plunging the room into the dim, purple twilight filtering through the portholes. She could feel it now, the strange pressure in the air, a heavy blanket that seemed to smother the very life in her. She tried to summon her power, to sprout an arm from the floor to trip them, but nothing happened. A cold dread, more profound than any she had felt since Eni's lobby, seized her. She was defenseless, the world's last hope of deciphering the past. And she was as helpless as a child. "I'm a burden. I always have been." The thought was a familiar poison. "They're all getting hurt, because of me." One of the figures took a step forward, its hand outstretched. She backed away, her chair scraping against the floor, until her back hit the cold glass of the large aquarium. There was nowhere else to go. On the deck, the fight had turned desperate. Zoro and Sanji were fighting back to back, their combined might barely holding off 4 of the assassins. Luffy was on his hands and knees, panting, his body feeling strangely heavy and weak. "I can't stretch right. It's like my rubber is melting." Chopper had tried to go into his larger forms, but found himself stuck, shifting painfully between brain point and walk point, his body spasming. "My rumble ball, it's not working," he cried out. The leader of the assassins, a slightly broader figure, watched the chaos with an unnerving stillness. It had deflected another of Zoro's strikes and was now simply observing, its head tilted. It saw the 2 figures enter the library, saw the crew's desperation, and then, its masked gaze turned toward the empty crow's nest. As if sensing its attention, a new figure appeared there. No one saw him arrive. One moment, the perch was empty. The next, a man stood there, his back to the grotesque sky, a dark, high-collared cloak fluttering around him. He was tall, with a shock of sun-bright blonde hair that seemed to defy the oppressive gloom. He stood motionless, his head bowed, his face obscured by shadow. The assassin leader tilted its head, a gesture of mild curiosity. It raised an arm, pointing a single finger at the newcomer. A silent command. 2 of its subordinates broke off their assault on Zoro and Sanji and leapt toward the crow's nest with silent, inhuman agility. The man in the crow's nest didn't move. Not until the assassins were almost upon him. Then, he looked up, and the world snapped into focus. His eyes were a color that had no place in nature. They were a pale, ethereal lavender, rippling with concentric circles like stones dropped in a perfectly still pond. They were ancient, powerful, and utterly devoid of fear. The 2 assassins reached him. The man's hands blurred. One moment they were at his sides, the next they were pressed against the chests of his attackers. There was no impact, no sound. But on the chest of each assassin, a complex swirl of black ink appeared, a sealing formula that flared with a violet light for a single, brilliant instant. The 2 assassins froze mid-air, their bodies locked in place, and then dropped to the deck below like stones. They didn't move. On the deck, everyone froze. The remaining assassins, Zoro, Sanji, Luffy, all eyes turned to the man in the crow's nest. The man, Naruto Uzumaki, let out a slow breath. He'd been tracking this strange energy signature for weeks, this creeping void that felt like a cancer on the world's life force. He'd felt it coalesce here, around this brightly colored, cheerful-looking ship. He had hoped he was wrong. His gaze swept the deck, taking in the scene with a glance. The struggling crew, the boy who seemed to be made of rubber but wasn't. The swordsman whose spirit was being dampened, the cook whose legs smoldered with residual heat. And he felt the focus of the oppressive energy, the epicenter of the attack. The library. He vanished from the crow's nest. There was no burst of speed, no flicker. He was simply gone. Inside the library, Robin had her eyes squeezed shut, bracing for the hand that would grab her. The one that would drag her back into the darkness. She heard a soft, almost imperceptible thump. She waited. Nothing happened. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The man with the impossible blonde hair was standing between her and her would-be captors. He hadn't even turned to face them. He was looking at her, and his rippling purple eyes held a strange, quiet intensity. He wasn't looking at her like a target, or a prize, or even a victim. He was just looking. And in that gaze, she felt an echo of her own soul-deep loneliness, a recognition that transcended words. One of the assassins behind him moved, its hand striking for the back of Naruto's neck. "Shinra Tensei," Naruto said, his voice a low, calm murmur. It wasn't a shout, it was barely a whisper. But an invisible, irresistible force erupted from his body. The two assassins were blasted backward, not with the explosive chaos of a cannonball, but with a clean, absolute push. They smashed through the far wall of the library, sailed through the air over the galley, and crashed into the main mast with enough force to crack the solid wood. They slumped to the deck, unconscious. Naruto didn't spare them a glance. His attention remained on Robin. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She could only shake her head, her voice caught in her throat. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "Good." He turned then, and walked out of the R.U.-lined library doorway onto the main deck. The remaining 7 assassins, including the leader, had formed a semicircle, their silent attention now completely fixed on him. Zoro and Sanji had scrambled back, using the reprieve to get their bearings. "Who is that guy?" Sanji hissed, rubbing his ankle. "I don't know," Zoro grunted, his hand tight on his sword. "But he's not normal." Luffy had pushed himself up, his eyes wide with a childlike wonder that had replaced his frustration. "Whoa, his eyes are all swirly." The assassin leader took a half step forward. Naruto met its gaze, his own expression unreadable. "You hunt people who can't fight back," he stated, his voice carrying across the deck. "You use this nullifying field. It makes you feel strong, doesn't it? To drain the power from others." The leader remained silent. "Let's see how you do against someone you can't drain." He moved. It was a different kind of speed than they had ever seen. It wasn't Kizaru's light speed, which was linear and explosive. It wasn't the blur of a Soru technique. He flowed like water, an unpredictable, unstoppable current. An assassin lunged, its fingers aimed at his eyes. Naruto swayed, the attack passing harmlessly by his ear. His own hand came up, not in a fist, but with 2 fingers extended, and jabbed the assassin in the armpit. The figure seized up, its limbs locking, and toppled over, paralyzed. Another 2 attacked from the flanks. Naruto didn't even look at them. He raised one hand. Bansho Tenon. The 2 assassins were abruptly yanked off their feet, pulled through the air. Tawa rode his open palm as if hooked by invisible ropes. Just before they collided with him, he sidestepped, letting them crash into each other with a sickening crunch of masks and limbs. 4 down. 3 to go. Zoro watched, his jaw tight. It wasn't just the power. It was the absolute, effortless control. There was no wasted motion, no theatricality. It was the cold, precise dismantling of a threat. Each move was perfectly executed. A testament to a lifetime of combat that was utterly alien to this world. The leader finally moved. It was faster than the others, its movements sharper. It appeared in front of Naruto, its hand a blade chopping at his neck. Naruto caught its wrist. For the first time, a flicker of surprise seemed to register in the leader's posture. Naruto's grip was like forged steel. "You have no will of your own, do you?" Naruto said, his voice quiet. He looked into the dark lenses of the mask. "Only orders. A puppet." He twisted his hand, and a small, black rod, no bigger than a finger, slid out from his sleeve into his palm. He tapped it against the leader's forehead. The assassin froze. The pressure that had been weighing on the entire ship, the heavy, dampening field, vanished in an instant. Luffy gasped, then grinned, stretching his cheeks out to absurd lengths. I'm rubbery again. Sanji's foot burst into flame, brighter and hotter than before. Zoro felt the keen edge of his haki return, sharp and clear in his mind. The power was back. The leader stumbled backward, clutching its head. The other two remaining assassins, seeing their advantage gone, made a fatal error. They hesitated. Naruto made a single hand sign. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In 2 puffs of white smoke, 2 perfect copies of Naruto appeared beside him. Before the assassins could even react, the clones were on them. A flurry of kicks and punches that ended with both figures sprawled on the deck, unconscious. Now, only the leader remained. It stood panting, the nullifying aura gone, its primary weapon useless. It looked at Naruto, then at the defeated forms of its squad, and then at the Thousand Sunnies railing. It made a decision. It turned to leap overboard. It didn't make it. A hand clamped down on its shoulder. The real Naruto was there, his purple eyes seeming to pierce the mask and see the terrified man beneath. You're not going anywhere. He pressed his palm against the leader's forehead. The leader's body went rigid, its head snapping back as if from an electric shock. Its masked face was turned toward the heavens. A few seconds passed, an unnerving silence. Then Naruto pulled his hand away. The leader collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut. The entire battle, from the moment Naruto had appeared, had lasted less than 3 minutes. Silence returned to the Thousand Sunny. But this time it was a silence born of shock, not oppression. The Straw Hat Pirate stood, scattered and bruised, staring at the blonde stranger who stood amidst the dozen inert, black-clad bodies. The deck was a wreck. The mast was cracked, and the library had a gaping hole in its side, but the threat was gone. Naruto surveyed the scene, his expression calm. He glanced at the unconscious figures. Then created another clone. Tie them up. Use their own cloaks. They won't be waking up for a while. The clone nodded and got to work with silent efficiency. The real Naruto turned to face the crew. His gaze passed over a wary Nami, a stunned Usopp and Chopper, a simmering Sanji, and an intensely focused Zoro. He gave a brief nod to Luffy, who was now bouncing on his heels, vibrating with excitement. Are you a robot, or an alien? Your eyes are so cool. Luffy chirped, all sense of danger forgotten. Naruto offered a small, tired smile. Neither. He then walked past them all, his footsteps soft on the grass, and stopped in front of the ruined library doorway. Robin was standing there, her arms wrapped around herself, her expression a mixture of terror, relief, and utter confusion. He stopped a respectful distance away. The intensity was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet solemnity. He saw the way she stood, the defensive posture, the deep-seated fear in her eyes. At no amount of bravery could fully conceal. It was a look he knew well. He had seen it in the mirror for years. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said, his voice gentle now. He looked from her to the unconscious assassins, then back to her. They were hunting you, specifically. This wasn't a random pirate attack. He paused, letting his words sink in. And this wasn't the first group I've seen like them. Robin's breath hitched. He knew. Somehow, this stranger knew the fundamental, cursed truth of her existence. Who are you? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. Naruto's gaze was unwavering. Someone who knows what it's like to be hunted. He took a half-step closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear it. And someone who was tired of watching it happen to others. Luffy bounded over, skidding to a halt beside them. That was amazing. You gotta join my crew. We could use a swirly-eyed guy. Naruto didn't look away from Robin. I'm not a pirate, he said calmly. And I'm not looking for a crew. He finally broke eye contact with her and addressed the captain. But your friend here is in danger. A kind of danger you're not equipped to handle alone. Zoro stepped forward, his hand resting on Wado Ikimonji's hilt. And you are. His voice was sharp with suspicion. Naruto met the swordsman's challenge without flinching. I am. The simple, 2-word answer held no arrogance. Only a statement of fact. It hung in the air, undeniable. He turned his attention back to the crew as a whole. These men, They're just soldiers. The one behind them is the real threat. They'll send more, stronger ones. They won't stop until they have her." He gestured toward Robin. A wave of guilt washed over Robin's face. She looked at her crewmates, at the damage to their ship, their home. This was her fault. It was always her fault. Naruto saw the shift in her expression. He saw the self-blame she was burying herself under. "I'll be her guardian," he announced, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "I will travel with you, on this ship. I won't interfere with your journey, your fights, or your goals. But if they show up again, I will deal with them." He looked directly at Robin, his purple eyes holding hers captive. "I will protect you until the source of this shadow is dealt with. For good." The offer was staggering. It wasn't a request. It was a declaration. This man, who had appeared from nowhere and wielded a power they couldn't comprehend, was offering to become her personal shield. Luffy's grin widened. For him, the decision was simple. Cool. A new friend. Okay. Nami looked from Naruto to the pile of defeated assassins, did a quick mental calculation of the cost of repairs versus the cost of being captured by a force that could negate devil fruits, and nodded slowly. If he can do that, it would be stupid to say no. Sanji scowled, blowing a plume of smoke. As long as he stays away from Nami Swan and Robin Kwan, he muttered, though his protest lacked its usual fire. He had seen how close Robin had come to being taken. Zoro just grunted, his eyes narrowed. He didn't trust him, but he had seen his power, and more importantly, he had seen that the man's focus was entirely on protecting Robin. For now, that was enough. Robin was speechless. She looked at Naruto, at this strange, powerful, and strangely sad-looking man who was offering her something she hadn't had since she was 8 years old, absolute, unconditional protection. It was terrifying. It was liberating. Naruto gave a slight nod, accepting their unspoken consensus. He walked over to the bound assassins. His clone had finished its work. He placed a hand on the forehead of the still unconscious leader. The crew watched, mystified, as he stood perfectly still for a full minute, his eyes closed. When he opened them, there was a new hardness in their depths. "They call themselves the Nullifiers," he said to no one in particular. "Their master is a celestial dragon. One who believes this world needs to be purified." He looked up at the sickly green-streaked sky. "It seems I've found what I was looking for." With a quiet word, another clone appeared, lifting the dozen unconscious bodies with ease and placing them onto a piece of wreckage from the library wall. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto painted a seal onto the wood. It glowed, and the makeshift raft began to propel itself away from the sunny, heading into the open sea. "What did you do?" Nami asked, her navigator's mind racing. "I scrambled their recent memories and gave them a new destination, the nearest marine base. Let the world government deal with its own trash," Naruto explained. "They won't remember me, or this ship. But their master will know they failed." He turned, his cloak settling around him. And his gaze once again found Robin. He walked toward the library, stopping to pick up one of her fallen books. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers for a brief moment. His touch was warm. "You should get some rest," he said softly. "The storm has passed, for now." As he walked away to find a quiet spot on the deck, content to stand watch, the Straw Hats were left in a state of stunned silence. Their ship was damaged, their bodies were bruised, but they were alive. And they had a new, temporary passenger. A man with the eyes of a god and the weight of a forgotten world on his shoulders. Robin clutched the book to her chest, her heart still beating a frantic rhythm. She looked from the departing back of Naruto Uzumaki to the hole in her library wall, and out at the vast, dark sea. The fear was still there, a cold stone in her stomach. But for the first time in a very, very long time, it was joined by something else. A flicker of impossible, terrifying hope. Miles away, in a chamber of sterile white marble high atop the red line in Mary Geoise, a translucent screen flickered and died. A young man with the immaculate white hair of the celestial dragon sat in a simple, unadorned throne. He wore the traditional white robes, but his were tailored, clean, and absent of the usual gaudy accoutrements. His face was sharp and intelligent, his expression one of cold disappointment. This was Saint Icarus. "A complete failure, my lord," a voice said from a kneeling figure cloaked in the same black as the assassins. The unit was neutralized. We have lost contact. Icarus didn't respond immediately. He raised a delicate hand, and a new image appeared on the screen, a grainy, frozen frame captured from the masked cam of the nullifier leader just before its mind was wiped. It was a close-up of a face. Blonde hair, whisker-like marks on the cheeks and eyes. Those impossible, purple, rippling eyes. "What is that?" Icarus murmured, his voice a silken whisper. He leaned forward, his own pale gray eyes narrowing. He had studied every known power in the world, every class of devil fruit, every application of hockey, every secret art of the CP divisions. This was none of them. This was other. "We don't know, my Lord Arbiter," the attendant said. "It is an anomaly." "An anomaly," Icarus repeated, a strange light entering his eyes. He thought of the old texts. The forbidden histories that spoke of the world before the Great Cleansing, of ancient powers that could create and destroy reality itself. Blasphemous powers. No, not an anomaly. He stood, his movements graceful and precise. He walked to a grand window that overlooked the world below, a patchwork of blue and green that he considered his sacred duty to keep clean. "It is an impurity," Saint Icarus declared, his voice ringing with the chilling conviction of a zealot. A remnant of a failed creation, drawn to the festering wound of the Ohara witch. An unacceptable flaw in the world's design. He turned back, a thin, cruel smile gracing his lips. "Find out everything you can about this, Naruto Uzumaki. His power is an affront to the perfect silence I intend to create." He looked back at the frozen image of the Rinnegan. "And all impurities must be erased." Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Whispers of Poneglyphs. The morning broke, painting the bruised sky in hues of soft pearl and rose. The sea had regained its familiar, boisterous rhythm, and the thousand sunny rocked with a cheerful energy that defied the violation of the previous night. The scent of salt and adventure was slowly ashing away the sterile chill of the nullifiers. Repairs were already underway. Frankie, bellowing about how unsuper it was for his ship to be so rudely damaged, was meticulously replacing the charred planks of the library wall with a craftsman's focus. Usopp was perched on the mainmast, carefully applying a resin to the crack Naruto's Shinra Tensei had inflicted, his usual boasts replaced by a quiet, concentrated diligence. The crew was healing their ship, and in doing so, healing themselves. Naruto was already awake. He hadn't slept. He stood at the stern, hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on their wake. He wasn't watching for enemies. His sensory abilities, a passive net of chakra that extended for miles, would alert him to any approaching threat long before his eyes could. He was simply watching the world, feeling its pulse. It was so different from his own. The energy here, hockey, as he was beginning to understand it, was a wild, untamed force, raw and potent. It was the life force of the planet itself. Vibrant and chaotic. It was beautiful. "Hey, swirly eyes." Naruto turned. Luffy was bouncing towards him, a wide, irrepressible grin plastered on his face. "You're up early. Did you see the sunrise? The colors were awesome. Can you do that eye thing again? The one where you pushed those guys. Can you push the water? Can you make a giant wave?" Naruto offered a faint, tired smile. This boy's energy was like a miniature sun. "It's not really a toy, Luffy." "Ah, but it's so cool." Luffy leaned in, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Are you sure you're not an alien? Zoro said you might be a demon from the sky. Are you a demon?" "No, not a demon." Naruto's smile became a little more genuine. It was impossible to remain stoic in the face of such relentless sincerity. He held up his hand and focused a minuscule amount of his life-giving yin-yang release chakra into his palm. A tiny, dormant seed he'd found on the deck yesterday began to twitch. In seconds, a green sprout emerged, unfurling 2 small leaves and then growing into a miniature, perfect orange flower. He plucked it and handed it to Luffy. Luffy's eyes went wide, sparkling like treasure. "Whoa, you're a magician, too. This is the best." He stuck the flower in the band of his straw hat, then patted Naruto on the back with a resounding thwack. "You're a good guy, Naruto. I'm glad you're here." And just like that, the captain's verdict was delivered. For Luffy, it was that simple. The smells of a kingly breakfast soon wafted from the galley. Sanji, ever the professional, was in his element. The crew gathered around the dining table, a little quieter than usual. Naruto took a seat, feeling the subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Usopp and Chopper kept glancing at him, then quickly looking away, whispering to each other. Nami was studying a map, but her gaze kept flicking towards him with a calculating, yet relieved, expression. And Zoro was staring at him. There was no animosity in the stare, just an intense, unblinking evaluation, like a predator sizing up a new creature in its territory. Sanji emerged, bearing platters of food, perfectly fluffy omelets, expertly grilled sea beast fillets, fresh fruit salads, and fragrant baked bread. He served the ladies first, of course, placing a plate adorned with a carved fruit heart before Robin. For you, my beautiful Robin Kwan. To chase away the nightmares. Robin gave him a small, grateful smile. Thank you, Sanji-kun. Sanji then placed a plate before Naruto. It was a generous portion, but unadorned. His movements were clipped, professional. Naruto looked at the food, then at the cook. Thank you, he said, his voice simple and sincere. It smells incredible. You're a true artist. Sanji froze for a second, caught off guard. He was used to praise. But Naruto's comment lacked the usual fawning. It was a statement of fact from someone who appreciated craftsmanship. A faint blush rose on the cook's neck. He just grunted, of course it is, and spun away to serve Luffy, who was already trying to steal food from Usopp's plate. The meal was halfway finished when Zoro finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that cut through the chatter. So, what's your price? The table went quiet. All eyes turned to the swordsman. Naruto finished chewing a piece of fish before answering, his purple eyes meeting Zoro's. I don't understand. Everyone has a price, Zoro said, his hand resting on the hilt of Shisui. Power like yours doesn't come without a cost, and you don't offer it for free. What do you want? Treasure? A favor? Are you working for someone else? The suspicion was a tangible thing, sharp and pointed. It wasn't malicious, it was protective. Naruto respected that. I want nothing from you or your captain, Naruto replied calmly. My reasons are my own. They involve her. He gave a slight nod towards Robin, who tensed at being the center of attention. And they are non-negotiable. Zoro's eyes narrowed. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. That's not good enough. The man who protects this crew has to be someone we can trust. I'm not letting some mystery demon stand behind us. He gestured to the door. Outside. Let's see what you're made of without the light show. Sanji shot up. Oi, Marimo, don't start trouble. He saved Robin Kwan's life. That's why I'm doing this, dartboard eyebrow. Zoro retorted. We need to know what he is. Naruto placed his utensils down and stood. He looked at Zoro, and for a moment, the calm in his eyes was replaced by the hardness of a warrior who had seen 100 battlefields. A fight won't tell you anything about my character. It will only prove that I am stronger than you. And you already know that. The sheer, unadorned confidence of the statement hung in the air. It wasn't a boast, it was an assessment. But if it will put your mind at ease, Naruto continued, his voice softening again, then fine. He walked out onto the sun-drenched grass of the deck. Zoro followed, his face a mask of grim determination. The crew scrambled after them, a mixture of anxiety and morbid curiosity on their faces. Zoro didn't bother with a warm-up. He drew his 3 swords. Assuming his stance, the air around him seemed to sharpen, to grow heavy with his intent. If I can't land a single hit, he declared, I'll accept it. But don't expect me to hold back. Naruto stood opposite him, his hands in his pockets. I wouldn't want you to. Zoro vanished. He reappeared right in front of Naruto, a blur of motion. Onigiri. 3 blades SL. Iced through the air where Naruto's neck and chest had been a split second before. But Naruto was no longer there. He was standing a few feet to the left, his posture unchanged, his hands still in his pockets. Zoro didn't pause. He flowed into his next attack, a whirlwind of steel. Toragari. The blades descended in a fierce, claw-like slash. Naruto swayed backward, leaning at an impossible angle, the tips of the swords missing his face by a millimeter. He didn't even blink. The crew watched in stunned silence. Zoro was a force of nature, a swordsman of prodigious skill and monstrous strength. But he was fighting a ghost. Is that all? Naruto asked, his voice laced with a hint of disappointment. The taunt worked. A vein throbbed on Zoro's forehead. He planted his feet, his muscles bulging as he channeled his power. Three-sword style secret technique, 3,000 worlds. He spun his swords, creating a vortex of cutting power, and launched himself at Naruto. It was his signature move, a blast of spiraling blades that could cleave a galleon in two. This time, Naruto didn't dodge. Just as the vortex of steel was about to engulf him, he took one hand out of his pocket. He didn't summon a weapon or prepare a grand technique. He simply met the attack with his open palm. His palm connected with the flat of Shisui. There was no deafening clang, no shockwave. There was only a quiet thump. The spiraling vortex of death stopped dead. Zoro's forward momentum vanished, completely and utterly absorbed. The three swords were frozen, held in place by the single, unyielding pressure of Naruto's hand. Zoro's eyes were wide with disbelief. He was pushing with all his strength, the muscles in his arms straining, his haki roaring, but his blades would not move. It was like trying to push over a mountain. Naruto looked at him, his purple eyes holding no judgment, only a deep, profound stillness. "Your spirit is strong," he said, his voice quiet. "You fight to protect your friends. That's a good reason to fight." He then applied the slightest pressure. Zoro was thrown backward, stumbling but staying on his feet, his sword still in his hands. The duel was over. Zoro hadn't landed a single hit. He hadn't even come close. Zoro stood there, breathing heavily, sweat beading on his brow. He wasn't looking at Naruto with suspicion anymore. He was looking at him with a dawning, terrifying respect. He sheathed his swords with a sharp click. "Fine," he grunted, turning away. "You can stay." He walked to the mast and sat down, closing his eyes. The matter, for him, was settled. He had tested the man's strength and found it absolute. The rest was just details. Naruto put his hand back in his pocket and walked back toward the galley, leaving the rest of the crew to process what they had just witnessed. Later that day, the tense energy had mostly dissipated. The crew fell into their usual routines, their initial shock giving way to a grudging acceptance of their new passenger. Naruto, for his part, was an unobtrusive presence. He spoke when spoken to, answered questions simply, and spent most of his time watching, learning the rhythms of the ship and its crew. He found himself drawn to the library. It was the quietest part of the ship, a place of contemplation. And it was Robin's domain. She was there, of course, a new cup of coffee on her desk, already engrossed in her books. The rubbings of the poneglyph from the night before were spread out, but she wasn't looking at them. She was staring at the new, perfectly fitted wooden planks of the wall, her expression distant. Naruto leaned against the doorway, not wanting to startle her. "Frankie does good work," he said softly. She looked up, her gaze guarded. "He is the best shipwright in the world." She paused. Then her curiosity seemed to get the better of her. "That force you used, the one that blew them through the wall. I've read of every devil fruit catalogued by the world government. I've never heard of one with such an ability. It's not a devil fruit," he said, walking into the room. He gestured to the ocean visible through the porthole. "I can swim just fine." That simple statement was, in its own way, more shocking than his display of power. In this world, it was an axiom. Power came at the cost of the sea. "It's called the Rinnegan," he explained, touching a finger to the corner of his eye. "It's a power from my homeland. An ocular jutsu." The words were foreign, alien. Jutsu. Rinnegan. Robin stored them away, her mind already cross-referencing them against the countless obscure texts she had memorized. "Nothing. Your homeland, is it on the Grand Line?" she asked. A shadow passed over Naruto's face, a flicker of a loss so profound it seemed to suck the warmth from the room. "No," he said, his voice quiet. "It's not on any map you'll ever find. It's gone." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Robin recognized that brand of grief. It was the same hollow echo she carried for Ohara. She decided to change the subject, gesturing to the rubbings on her desk. "These are poneglyphs," she said, her voice regaining its academic crispness. "Indestructible stones left by an ancient civilization. They tell the true history of the world, a history the world government has spent 800 years trying to erase." Naruto walked over, his interest genuine. He looked at the strange, angular script. Why erase it? Because knowledge is power, she replied simply. And they fear any power they can't control. She explained the Void Century, the 20 kingdoms that formed the world government. And her own lonely quest to find the Rio Poneglyph, the one stone that would tell the complete story. He listened with an unnerving focus, his head tilted. He didn't seem surprised or shocked, but rather, understanding. History is written by the victors, he murmured, the phrase so familiar it was like an echo from his own past. They demonize the losers, sanctify their own cause, and bury the truth so deep no one will ever question their right to rule. Robin stared at him. He had just summarized the core of her entire struggle in a single, cynical sentence. You understand. I've seen it before, he said, his gaze distant. A history of hatred, passed down through generations, built on lies and misunderstandings, until no one even remembers how the fighting started. Only that they must continue to hate. They spoke for hours. Robin, for the first time, had someone who wasn't just listening, but comprehending the philosophical weight of her quest. He didn't care about the ancient weapon, Pluto, or the military implications. He cared about the truth and the people who had been silenced. He asked questions no one else ever had. Not about what the poneglyphs said, but about the people who wrote them. What kind of person spends their life carving a message they know they'll never see delivered? He asked. The question hung in the air, reframing her entire academic pursuit. They weren't just artifacts. They were testaments. Late in the afternoon, the log pose settled on a small, uncharted island. It was little more than a jungle-covered rock, but Chi was a chance to stretch their legs and restock on fresh water. Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper immediately formed an expedition team to explore. Zoro went off to find a place to train. Sanji foraged for rare ingredients. Nami plotted her maps. Naruto and Robin disembarked together. The crew had already begun to see them as a single unit. He was her shadow, a silent, watchful guardian. They walked in comfortable silence along a winding jungle path. It was on this path, half buried under a tangle of ancient roots, that they found it, a perfect cube of that familiar dark stone, no larger than a treasure chest. Covered in the same angular script. A poneglyph. Here, Robin's eyes lit up with a feverish excitement. She immediately knelt, pulling out paper and charcoal from her bag. This is incredible. It's not part of the main historical record. This might be a personal account, a message. She worked quickly, her fingers flying across the paper, her mind translating the dead language as easily as she breathed. After a few minutes, she frowned. It's a warning, she said. About a great power that renders all others to silent dust. It speaks of a celestial judgment, and a sky god's misguided purity. But it's fragmented. The grammar is archaic, even for this script. The writer was in a hurry. I can't get the full context. She sat back, frustrated. It was a tantalizing piece of the puzzle, but it was incomplete. Naruto had been watching her, his expression thoughtful. He looked at the stone, then at Robin's frustrated face. Can I try something? He asked. She looked at him, confused. What could you do? Can you read this language? No, he said, but I can listen. He knelt beside her and placed his palm flat against the cold stone of the poneglyph. He closed his eyes. The world went silent. He wasn't reading the engraved letters. He was using his Rinnegan to sense the residual chakra, the echo of the will and emotion that had been poured into this stone when it was carved. For a moment, nothing. Then, it came. It wasn't a voice. It was a flood of sensation. A cascade of images and feelings, faint and weathered by 8 centuries of time. He saw calloused hands, strong and square, chipping away at the stone with a strange, glowing chisel. He felt the overwhelming sorrow of the carver, a deep, abiding grief for a kingdom already lost. It was a man from Wano, He could tell from the architecture in the fleeting glimpses of memory, a Kazuki clan stonemason. He felt the man's fear. A cold, paralyzing terror of a power that wasn't of this world. He saw a flash of white light. Heard a deafening silence. He felt the man's desperation, carving this message in secret, hoping it would survive the cataclysm. And beneath it all, a tiny, stubborn spark of hope. A hope that someone, someday, would find this and understand. Naruto opened his eyes, pulling his hand away as if the stone were hot. He looked at Robin, his expression shaken. He was a stonemason, Naruto said, his voice hoarse. From Wano. He carved this as his country was falling. He wasn't just warning about a power, he was mourning it. He felt that the power, the celestial judgment, was a perversion of true purity. A silence where there should be life. He was terrified, but he was more sad than anything. He hoped his daughter had escaped. Robin stared at him, her charcoal forgotten in her hand. The technical, fragmented translation she had made was suddenly, vividly alive. He had given it a soul. The anonymous carver was now a man, a grieving father from Wano, hiding in the dark to leave one last mark on the world. He hadn't just read the poneglyph. He had communed with its ghost. Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden. It was the most profound validation of her life's work she had ever experienced. How? She breathed. Everything leaves an echo, Naruto said simply, his gaze soft. You just have to know how to listen. In that moment, standing in the dappled light of the jungle, the bond between them solidified. It was no longer just about protection or shared loneliness. It was a connection forged in the crucible of history, a shared understanding that ran deeper than words. He didn't just protect her body. He understood her soul. Their next stop was far less serene. The log pose, after a day of calm sailing, locked onto an island that, on the charts, was a bustling trade hub known for its unique crystal architecture. But as they drew closer, an eerie stillness fell over the ship. It was the same wrongness as the night of the attack, but magnified 1,000-fold. I don't hear any birds, Chopper said, his nose twitching. I don't smell any people. Or animals. Or anything. They docked at a pristine, empty harbor. The city before them was breathtaking, a call. Action of crystalline towers that refracted the sunlight into 1,000 rainbows. But it was a silent beauty. The streets were clean. The market stalls were fully stocked with petrified fruit and goo. DS that had turned to dust at the slightest touch. The doors to the houses were open, revealing tables set for meals that would never be eaten. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no dust, no decay. It was a city-sized tomb, perfectly preserved and utterly devoid of life. Luffy, usually the first to charge in, stood on the deck, his expression serious. There's no one here. I can't feel anyone. It's all empty. Naruto stepped onto the pier, his eyes narrowed, his Rinnegan active. He knelt and touched the ground. The energy signature was unmistakable. It was the nullifier's power, but on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. It wasn't a temporary dampening field. It was a permanent, absolute erasure. He was here, Naruto said, his voice dangerously low. The celestial dragon, Icarus. What happened to them? Nami asked, her voice trembling as she looked at the silent, beautiful city. He didn't kill them, Naruto explained, a cold fury in his eyes. He unmade them. He nullified their existence, their energy, their very concept, wiped clean. He stood up, looking at the horrifyingly perfect city. This is his purification. The crew stood in horrified silence. A buster call was destruction. This was annihilation on a conceptual level. It was the work of a god, or a devil. The threat of Saint Icarus was no longer an abstract concept. It was a silent, crystalline city standing as a monument to his terrifying power. Robin looked at the city, then at Naruto. She saw the barely contained rage in his posture, the storm gathering behind his purple eyes. He was anger. Why on behalf of the people who had been erased, people he had never known? That empathy, she realized, was the source of his true strength. That night, the mood on the sunny was heavy. The laughter was gone. Even the sea seemed to murmur a somber dirge. Robin found herself on the observation deck, leaning against the railing and staring up at the blanket of stars, feeling the immense weight of that silent city on her shoulders. It's my fault, she whispered to the darkness. No, it's not, a voice said from beside her. Naruto was there, leaning on the railing, his presence a comfort rather than an intrusion. That city, those people, they're gone because he's hunting me. The danger follows me, it always has. Naruto was silent for a long moment, watching the stars alongside her. When I was a kid, he began, his voice soft. Almost hesitant, I was an outcast. I had something sealed inside me. A power that everyone in my village feared and hated. They didn't see me. They saw it. The adults would turn their backs when I walked by. They'd whisper to their children to stay away from me. He paused, a humorless smile touching his lips. They wouldn't look at me. They'd just look past me. Like I was a ghost they hoped would disappear if they didn't acknowledge it. I spent years trying to get them to see me. Playing pranks, shouting, doing anything to prove I was real. Robin turned to look at him. The moonlight softened the hard lines of his face, revealing a vulnerability she had not seen before. I know that look, she said, her voice barely audible. The way their smiles freeze when they realize your name. The silence when you walk into a room. You become a symbol of their fear. You cease to be a person. He nodded, his gaze still on the stars. It's a lonely feeling. The loneliest, she agreed. They stood in a shared, comfortable silence. It wasn't a cure for their old wounds, but it was a balm. It was the profound, earth-shattering realization that for the first time, they were standing next to someone who truly, fundamentally understood the shape of their solitude. He didn't pity her. He recognized her. The people of that city weren't your fault, Robin, Naruto said finally, his voice firm. They were his. Evil is not a force of nature that follows you around. It's a choice made by men like him. My fight is with him, not with your past. He turned to her, his purple eyes catching the starlight, and for the first time, she saw not a guardian or a warrior, but just a man. A man who had decided to stand between her and the abyss, perhaps because he had spent so much of his own life staring into it. High atop the red line, the 5 elders were convened in their shadowed chamber. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Before them stood Saint Icarus, his white robes seeming to glow in the dim light. The island of Tessero is cleansed, Icarus reported, his voice as calm and sterile as the city he had just erased. The corruption has been purged. Your methods are extreme, Icarus, said the tall, blonde elder, his fingers steepled. An entire populace, wiped from existence. This will draw unwanted attention. It is a message, Icarus countered, his tone unwavering. To the filth that bubbles up from the sea, the dreamers, the revolutionaries, the seekers of forbidden truth. It tells them that there are consequences. The great cleansing of the void century was not an endpoint. It was the establishment of a principle your government has allowed to erode. The bald, sword-bearing elder gripped his hilt. Do not lecture us on governance, boy. We have maintained the balance of this world for centuries. Icarus gave a smile that did not reach his eyes. You have maintained a stalemate. You manage chaos. I intend to eliminate it. And now, a new element of chaos has been introduced. An image flickered to life in the center of the room. It was Naruto's face, his Rinnegan clearly visible. Through a text recovered from a forgotten archive beneath Mary Geoise. We have identified this power, Icarus announced. The eyes are called the Rinnegan. The Sage of 6 Paths. A myth, a legend from before the world was shaped. A power of creation, of connection. A cosmic error that stands as the antithesis of my work. The elders stared at the image, their ancient, weary faces betraying a flicker of true alarm. This man, Naruto Uzumaki, has become the self-appointed guardian of the Ohara Witch, Icarus continued. He is not a pirate. He is an ideological plague. His very existence promotes the concept of bonds, of connection, of messy, chaotic life. He is the primary obstacle to the perfect, silent order this world has craved for a millennium. Icarus bowed slightly, a gesture of mock respect. Grant me full authority. Let me wield the Arbiter's judgment without restraint. I will not only retrieve the key to the past but erase the blasphemous light that protects her. I will finish the work our ancestors began. The 5 elders exchanged a long, silent look. They were playing with a fire that could consume them all. But the alternative, this, Naruto Uzumaki, and the truth Nico Robin sought, was perhaps even more dangerous. Very well, Saint Icarus. The blonde elder said at last, his voice heavy. You have our consent. Do what you must, but be swift. The world must not be shaken. A triumphant, chilling smile spread across Icarus's face. It will not be shaken, he promised. It will be silenced. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Unchained God. The thousand sunny sailed under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, the sea a restless expanse of churning dark water. The silent, crystalline city was a memory that clung to them like a shroud, a stark reminder of the stakes. The crew's mood was grim, the usual boist. Urus energy replaced by a coiled tension. They were no longer just adventurers, they were fugitives from a force that could unmake reality. Naruto stood on the foredeck, a solitary figure against the wind. He was sensing the world. His chakra a subtle net cast across the waves. He felt the life around them. The distant leviathans calling to each other in the abyssal deep, the shoals of fish darting beneath the surface. The very pulse of the ocean. And he felt something else. A cold, orderly pattern approaching. A fleet, not pirates. Their energy signatures were too uniform, too disciplined. Marines. Nami, he called out. His voice cutting through the wind. How far to the next island? Nami, who was anxiously studying her charts in the open-air galley, looked up. Too far. At least a day's sail. Why, we're about to have company, he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. A lot of it. Seconds later, Usopp shrieked from the crow's nest. Ships. Aft. Dozens of them. The crew scrambled. Zoro was instantly on his feet. Hand on his swords. Sanji dropped the vegetables he was peeling and sprinted to the railing. Luffy, who had been trying to fish, pulled in his line and stared. They appeared as dark specks at first, but grew with alarming speed. 10 massive warships, their sails emblazoned with the seagull insignia of the Marines, cutting through the water in a perfect, menacing V formation. They were flanking the Sunny, closing in to cut off any chance of escape. At the head of the fleet was a ship twice the size of the others, its figurehead a snarling, multi-headed dog. That's a buster call. Nami breathed, her face draining of color. The words were a curse, a name for a nightmare she and Robin had already survived once. Her body trembled, the phantom scent of smoke and ash filling her lungs. Robin, who had been reading on a deck chair, froze. Her book slipped from her fingers. Enies lobby. The burning island. The screams, the rain of cannonballs. The world narrowing to a single, terrifying truth. Her existence was a cataclysm. Her friends were about to face annihilation, all for her. No, she whispered, her eyes wide with a familiar, soul-crushing terror. Not again. Naruto was beside her in an instant. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a solid wall against the rising tide of her panic. This isn't Enies lobby, he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of her fear. I am here. He looked at her, his purple eyes cutting through her terror. They will not touch this ship. They will not touch you. Go below with Nami and Chopper. Frankie, get ready for evasive maneuvers. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, get ready to defend the ship from cannon fire. But do not engage the enemy directly. Understood. His orders were swift, clear, and delivered with an authority that no one thought to question. Luffy, for once, didn't argue. He saw the look in Naruto's eyes, a seriousness that dwarfed his own when he got truly angry. This was different. This was not a fight. This was a call. What are you going to do? Luffy asked, his voice low. I'm going to end this quickly, Naruto replied. From the lead ship, a voice boomed across the water, amplified by a den mushi. It was a harsh, grating sound, filled with self-righteous fury. Pirates of the Straw Hat. You are harboring 2 of the world's greatest criminals, Devil Child, Nico R.O. Bin and the blasphemous entity known as Rinnegan. By the authority of the world government and the tenets of absolute justice, you are sentenced to immediate annihilation. This is Vice Admiral Onagumo. Prepare to be sunk. Onagumo stood on the bridge of his flagship, a tall, severe man with 8 sword-bearing arms, 6 of which were spider-like appendages sprouting from his back, a result of a devil fruit. His face was a grim mask of zealotry. He was a man who saw the world in black and white, and the straw hats were a splash of chaotic color he was eager to paint over. All ships, open fire, he roared. 100 cannons swiveled, aimed, and belched fire and smoke. The air filled with the whistle of cannonballs arcing through the sky, a storm of iron and death descending on the thousand Sunny. Here they come, Usopp screamed, diving for cover. Zoro and Sanji braced themselves. Luffy took a deep breath, ready to inflate. But Naruto simply raised a hand. Prate a path, he murmured. He didn't move, he just stood there, his cloak billowing around him, as the first wave of cannonballs came screaming in. They were meters from the ship when a shimmering, invisible dome of energy pulsed out from Naruto's body, enveloping the Sunny completely. The cannonballs struck the barrier and simply stopped. They hung in the air for a moment, their momentum completely absorbed, before dropping harmlessly into the sea. Not a single shot got through. The crew stared in disbelief. Onagumo, watching through his spyglass, grit his teeth in frustration. What is that? Some kind of barrier. Continuous fire. Overwhelm it. Another volley, and another, rained down on the Sunny. All of them met the same fate, absorbed by the invisible shield. It was like throwing stones into a pond. Naruto's expression didn't change. He was a statue of calm amidst the futile bombardment. Absorbing the kinetic energy of the cannonballs was a trivial drain on his reserves. He was analyzing the fleet, the formation, the chain of command. He wasn't just defending, he was strategizing. "Frankie, turn a starboard, full speed," he said, his voice calm. "I need to draw them into a tighter formation." "You got it, bro," Frankie yelled from the helm. Spinning the wheel, the Sunny lurched, veering sharply to the right. As predicted, the Marine fleet adjusted, the 10 ships turning to follow, compressing their perfect V into a dense, clumsy cluster. They were a pack of wolves herding their prey, unaware they were being led into a trap. "Good," Naruto whispered. He made a single hand sign. "Animal path. Summoning jutsu." He slammed his palm onto the deck. A massive black seal exploded outward, covering half the ship. With a gargantuan puff of smoke that dwarfed the Sunny itself, something colossal erupted from the seal. A monstrous, multi-headed dog, easily the size of a warship, crashed into the sea with a tidal wave of a splash. It had savage, snarling faces, and its eyes glowed with the same purple, rippling pattern as Naruto's. It immediately charged one of the flanking warships. At the same time, a giant, horned rhinoceros and a massive, bird-like creature with a drill-like beak materialized. Each one targeting a different section of the fleet. The Marines' orderly formation dissolved into chaos. The giant dog seized a warship in its massive jaws, shaking it like a chew toy, snapping the masts and sending soldiers screaming into the water. The rhinoceros, a living battering ram, plowed into the side of another ship, its horn ripping through the hull with a horrific screech of tearing metal. The bird soared into the air, dodging cannon fire with impossible agility, before dive-bombing a third ship, its beak piercing the deck and shattering the main cannon emplacements. Onagumo watched in horror. What are those beasts? Where did they come from? He had faced sea kings and monsters of the deep, but these were different. They moved with a terrifying intelligence, their EYs glowing with that same blasphemous purple light. They were extensions of the man's will. The fleet was in disarray. Ships were colliding, cannons were firing wildly, and soldiers were too busy fighting for their lives against the titanic summons to even think about the thousand Sunny. "Now, for the main event," Naruto said, his gaze locked on Onagumo's flagship. He leapt from the Sunny's deck, landing softly on the churning water. He didn't sink. He stood on the surface as if it were solid ground, the waves parting around his feet. He began to walk towards the flagship, each step calm and deliberate. The Marines on the flagship stared, their rifles and cannons trained on the approaching figure. A man was walking on water. "Fire! Fire at will! Kill him!" Onagumo bellowed, his composure finally cracking. They unleashed everything they had. Cannonballs, rifle fire, even a bazooka team on the foredeck. Naruto continued his unhurried walk. A swirl of black energy, like a miniature vortex, appeared in his left hand. All the projectiles, from bullets to cannonballs, veered off course as if caught in a powerful magnetic field, swirling into the vortex and vanishing. It was the Preta path again, but this time focused. Aggressive. He was not only absorbing the attacks, he was pulling them in. He was halfway to the ship when a figure leapt from the deck to intercept him. It was a Marine captain. A large man with a bullish face, his arms coated in a shimmering black layer of armament hockey. A Logia user, Naruto sensed. His body was made of tar. "You face Captain Grime of Marine HQ." The man roared, his body dissolving into a wave of thick, black sludge that shot across the water. "I'll drown you in my swamp." The wave of tar surged towards Naruto. He didn't try to dodge. He just raised his right hand. The black rod he'd used on the nullifier leader slid from his sleeve. The tar wave hit him. And parted. The sludge flowed around him as if he were a rock in a stream, refusing to touch him. Captain Grime reformed in front of him, his face a mask of shock. What? Why can't I? Naruto looked at him, his expression one of almost clinical disinterest. Your power is chaotic, unrefined. He reached out and tapped the captain's forehead with the black rod. Captain Grime froze, his eyes going wide. The tar that formed his body seemed to lose its cohesion, turning from a viscous sludge into a runny, inert liquid. He lost his form, collapsing into a shapeless black puddle on the surface of the water, unable to reform. Neutralized. Naruto stepped over the puddle and continued his walk. He reached the hull of the flagship. He didn't climb. He just kept walking, straight up the vertical wooden surface, his feet adhering to it as if gravity were a suggestion he chose to ignore. He reached the deck and stepped over the railing, standing before the terrified and dumbfounded marine soldiers. The entire deck was silent. They had thrown a storm at him, and he had walked through it without a single scratch. Onagumo, his face pale, drew his 8 swords, his spider limbs extending menacingly. So, you've come to face me, demon. Your tricks won't work on me. My justice is absolute. He lunged, a whirlwind of 8 blades, his haki screaming. Naruto didn't even look at him. His attention was on the transponder snail on the command deck, the one broadcasting the buster call command. He needed to shut it off. From his back, a third arm, made of metallic, interlocking plates, burst forth. It held a small, serrated rocket. Asura Path. The arm fired the rocket. It wasn't aimed at Onagumo, but past him. The vice admiral, consumed by his attack, didn't even see it. The rocket hit the transponder snail with a small, precise explosion, shattering it. The command signal died. At the same time, 2 more mechanical arms erupted from Naruto's body. One morphed into a razor-sharp blade that met Onagumo's 8 swords, blocking them all in a shower of sparks. The other arm's hand opened, revealing a cannon-like nozzle in the palm. It aimed directly at Onagumo's chest. Onagumo's eyes widened in terror. He was locked in place, his blades held fast, a weapon of unknown power aimed at his heart. Your absolute justice, Naruto said, his voice cold and echoing with mechanical reverberation from his partial transformation, is just a justification for murder. You're a slave to an idea, not a protector of people. The cannon in his palm glowed with compressed energy. Onagumo squeezed his eyes shut. But the blast never came. Instead, Naruto retracted his blade arm, using the opening to deliver a single, brutal punch to the vice admiral's gut. The air rushed from Onagumo's lungs in a single, pained gasp. His spider limbs went limp, and he crumpled to the deck, unconscious. The mechanical arms retracted back into Naruto's body as if they had never been. He stood there, once again just a man in a dark cloak. He looked at the hundreds of terrified soldiers around him. Men who were just following orders. He could slaughter them all. The thought made him sick. He turned and walked to the bow of the flagship, looking out at the rest of the fleet. His summons had done their job. 3 ships were crippled and sinking, their crews scrambling into lifeboats. The others were damaged, disorganized, their morale shattered. The buster call was broken. Now, to send the message. He rose into the air, levitating effortlessly until he was high above the fleet, a single, solitary figure against the dark sky. The soldiers on every ship stared up at him in awe and terror. He was a god, descended from the heavens to pass judgment. He raised his hands. This ends now, he said, his voice quiet, yet it carried across the entire fleet, amplified by his chakra. He spread his arms wide. Shinra Tensei. It was not the focused blast he had used in the library. This was different. This was control on a planetary scale. A wave of invisible, omnidirectional force erupted from his body. But it wasn't destructive. It was a push. A colossal, irresistible push. The sea itself heaved. The 10 warships, each weighing thousands of tons, were lifted on the swell of a manifac. Turd wave and then shoved violently backward. They were thrown apart like toys in a bathtub, their formation shattered, their momentum reversed. They skidded across the water for miles, scattered and broken. Their retreat no longer a choice but an inevitability. He had dispersed an entire fleet without sinking a single ship he hadn't specifically targeted for disablement. The message was delivered. You are outmatched. You are not welcome here. Leave. Naruto floated in the air for a moment longer, ensuring they were truly retreating. Then, he let himself drift back down, landing on the deck of the Thousand Sunny as gently as a leaf. He was breathing a little heavily, a sheen of sweat on his brow. Maintaining the barrier, controlling 3 large summons, and using a wide-scale Shinra Tensei had taken a toll, even on him. The crew was staring at him. Their expressions were a mixture of awe, fear, and profound, staggering relief. Luffy's jaw was on the floor. Sanji's cigarette had burned down to his fingers without him noticing. Zoro was standing, his one good eye wide, a slow grin spreading across his face. Holy shit, Usopp whispered, summing up the mood perfectly. Robin was standing at the top of the stairs leading from the galley. She had watched the entire thing through a porthole. She had watched him stand against a force that had shattered her life, and she had watched him dismantle it with the casual, terrifying grace of a force of nature. He hadn't just defeated it. He had dismissed it. He looked up and met her gaze. The hardness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a familiar, weary softness. He saw the unshed tears in her eyes, the trembling relief in her posture. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. You're safe. That single, silent gesture broke the dam. A tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of fear or sadness. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated relief. The weight of the world, which she had carried on her shoulders for 20 years, had just been lifted. Not forever, but for now, and it had been lifted by one man. Zoro walked up to Naruto, the grin still on his face. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the scattered, retreating specks of the marine fleet. Then back at Naruto. He gave a single, sharp nod. It was a gesture of ultimate, unqualified respect. The swordsman's last reservation had just been obliterated. This man wasn't just an ally. He was a strategic asset beyond measure. He was the ultimate shield. Luffy finally snapped out of his stupor and launched himself at Naruto, wrapping his rubbery arms around him in a tight hug. That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. You're the best. You pushed the whole ocean. Naruto stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden affection. He grunted, patting the rubbery captain on the back. All right, Luffy, all right, let go. The tension was broken. The crew erupted into cheers. They weren't just cheering for their victory, they were cheering for him. For the impossible man who had single-handedly stood against the world government's ultimate weapon and won without losing his soul. Later that evening, as the Sunny sailed on calm waters under a clear, starry sky, Naruto sat alone on the lion's head figurehead, watching the moon. The exhaustion was setting in, a deep ache in his bones. He was powerful, but he was not infinite. He heard soft footsteps behind him. It was Robin. She carried 2 cups of coffee. She offered one to him. Thank you, he said, taking the warm mug. She sat beside him, her posture relaxed for the first time since he'd met her. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves. Why? She asked finally, her voice soft. Why go to such lengths? You could have just helped us escape. Naruto looked out at the moonlit water. Running doesn't solve anything. It just postpones the confrontation. I didn't just want to save you from them today. I wanted to send a message to their master. I wanted him to understand that sending his pawns after you is a futile effort. He took a sip of coffee. And I wanted you to see that. To know that you don't have to be afraid. She looked at her hands, wrapped around her cup. I haven't felt not afraid since I was a child. It's a foreign feeling. You'll get used to it, he said. He looked at her, a small, genuine smile on his face. You chose a good crew. They were willing to face a buster call for you. That's not something to be taken lightly. They are my family, she said, her voice thick with emotion. And now, they think I've brought a god of destruction into their lives. Naruto chuckled, a low, warm sound. Hardly. I just have a very particular set of skills. He chose not to destroy the fleet, to kill all those men. He had seen enough death in his life to last 1,000 lifetimes. His goal wasn't destruction. It was to build a space so safe that the people he cared about could live without fear. He saw this ship, this crew, as the first foundation of that space in this new world. And he saw the woman sitting beside him as its heart. You chose not to kill them, she observed, her brilliant mind having already processed the tactical and moral implications of his actions. You had the power to wipe them from existence, but you chose to disable and repel. That requires more strength than simple destruction. Peace can't be built on a pile of corpses, he said, the words heavy with the weight of old wars and older friends. I learned that the hard way. They sat there for a long time, talking under the stars. They talked not of battles or powers, but of books, of history, of the quiet moments that make a life worth fighting for. And as they spoke, the last of Robin's terror finally, truly, receded, replaced by a quiet, burgeoning warmth in her chest. In Mary Geoise, the news arrived not by official report, but by panicked, disjointed whispers from the survivors. The Buster Call, the symbol of the world government's unassailable might, had been defeated, not just defeated, humiliated, scattered, rendered impotent by a single man. The 5 elders sat in stunned silence in their chamber. The sheer scale of the report was impossible. The vice admiral, a veteran warrior, neutralized an entire fleet, manhandled like children's toys. Saint Icarus stood before them, listening to the report from a terrified marine officer via a den mushi. His face was a mask of cold, calculating fury. His gambit had failed spectacularly. He had sent a hammer to swat a fly and had watched as the fly shattered the hammer. He is not a man. The officer on the other end stammered. He is a monster, a demon in human form. He commanded beasts from the abyss. He walked on water. He turned our own cannons against us. Icarus silenced the snail with a contemptuous flick of his wrist. This changes nothing, he said, his voice dangerously soft. The elders looked at him, their expressions a mixture of fear and anger. It changes everything, the sword-bearing elder snarled, rising to his feet. You have provoked a power we do not understand. You have revealed a weakness at the heart of our military might. No, Icarus said, turning to face them, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. I have merely confirmed a hypothesis. Conventional forces are an irrelevance. The old ways of war, brute force, numbers, hockey, they are obsolete when faced with a true, conceptual power. He smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. He has shown me his hand. He fights to protect. He values life. He is strong, but he is sentimental. His restraint is his weakness. He paced the chamber, his mind already formulating a new, more insidious strategy. You cannot fight a god with soldiers. You must fight him with dogma. You cannot destroy him with cannons. You must poison that which he protects. He stopped, his gaze falling upon a map of the world. The name, Rinnegan, will no longer be a footnote in a report. It will be a curse on the lips of every citizen in the world. He will not be a mysterious entity. He will be the world's greatest enemy. A demon who commands monsters and seeks to unleash the Ohara witch to drown the world in chaos. He looked at the 5 elders, his expression one of absolute certainty. We will not send another fleet. We will turn the world against him. We will make it so that every island he visits, every person he tries to protect, will see him not as a savior, but as the source of their suffering. We will isolate him. We will make him a pariah. And when he is truly alone, with the weight of a world's hatred on his shoulders, then, I will descend and purify him myself. The elders were silent, caught in the terrifying grip of his cold, fanatical logic. He was no longer a celestial dragon with a unique power. He was becoming a rival force, an ideological counterpoint to their delicate balance. And he had just declared a new kind of war. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Promise. The news spread like a virus. It traveled on the wings of news coups, crackled across the scrambled transmissions of the world government, and was whispered in the taverns of every port. It wasn't just a news story. It was a declaration of war, a global decree of condemnation. The first bounty poster hit them on a bustling, rainy island in the New World where they had stopped for supplies. Nami had gone to exchange some of their gold for belly, and she came back to the sunny white as a sheet, her hands trembling as she held the freshly printed papers. The crew gathered in the galley, the rain drumming a somber tattoo on the roof. Nami spread the posters on the table. Their own bounties had all seen a staggering increase. Luffy's picture, a wide, triumphant grin, was now worth 800 million belly. Zoro and Sanji had been pushed into the 400 million range. The rest of the crew, including Robin, had all received significant jumps. But it was the other poster that sucked the air out of the room. It was a stark, menacing image. A grainy, high-contrast shot of Naruto, clearly taken during the Buster Call confrontation. He was levitating, his cloak spread like dark wings, his face a mask of cold fury. And his eyes, the government printers had highlighted them, making the purple ripples of the Rinnegan glow with an unnatural, demonic light. Beneath the image, the name was simple, Naruto Uzumaki. But it was the epithet, printed in bold, blood-red letters, that made Robin's heart stop. The demon god of Ohara's witch. The bounty was astronomical, a number that defied belief. Dead or alive, 1,500,000. Oh, belly. It was a figure that put him on par with a Yonko. But it wasn't the number that was the most damaging. It was the name. It wasn't Rinnegan, Naruto. It was a title that explicitly, cruelly, tied him to her. It painted him as her monstrous master, and her as the malevolent source of his power. The world government hadn't just made him a target, they had shackled him to her curse. 1.5 billion, Usopp squeaked, his voice cracking. That's more than. It's a declaration, Zoro said, his voice a low growl. His single eye was fixed on the poster, not with fear, but with a cold anger. They're not just trying to get him captured. They're trying to make him the world's public enemy number one. Demon god of Ohara's witch. Sanji spat the words like poison. His fist clenching. Those bastards. They're trying to pin everything on Robin Kwan again. Luffy stared at the poster, his usual excitement over a high bounty completely absent. He poked the picture of Naruto's face. This isn't Naruto. Naruto smiles more. He looked around the table, his expression dead serious. This is a stupid picture. And a stupid name. The weight in the room was crushing. This was different from their own bounties, which they wore as badges of honor. This was a targeted campaign of vilification. It was Icarus's promise made manifest. They could already feel the change in the atmosphere. The friendly merchants in the town had grown quiet and watchful when they saw the Sunny. The whispers followed them. They weren't just pirates anymore. They were the entourage of a demon. Frankie slammed his metal fist on the table, making the posters jump. This is so unsuper. They're trying to scare us. Trying to split us up. Is it working? Usopp asked, his voice small. Looking at the astronomical number. He wasn't looking at Naruto, but the implication was clear. They had survived a Buster Call, but could they survive being the target of every ambitious bounty hunter? Every marine, every kingdom looking to curry favor with the world government, from here to the end of the Grand Line. Robin said nothing. She sat frozen, her hands in her lap, her face a pale, a motionless mask. But inside, a glacial cold was spreading through her veins. It was happening again. Just like with Saul. Just like with every kind family that had taken her in only to be destroyed. Just like with her own crew at Water 7. Her existence was a poison. It had tainted them all, and now it had corrupted him. This man, who had offered her a sliver of peace, had been branded a demon because of her. The bounty, the name, it was a brand on his soul, and she was the one holding the iron. Naruto was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had been silent throughout the entire exchange. He looked at the poster, at the monstrous caricature of himself, and felt a distant, familiar ache. The villagers of Konoha, the whispers, the hatred. He had thought he had left that all behind. He looked at Robin. He saw the mask she was wearing, the perfect, serene composure of a woman screaming on the inside. He saw the guilt she was drowning in. And it made his own chest tighten with a fury colder and deeper than anything the Buster Call had provoked. The storm outside intensified, the rain lashing against the portholes, the wind howling a mournful song. The mood was set. That night, the ship was a ghost, its crew retreating into their own troubled thoughts. Dinner was a silent affair. No one knew what to say. The camaraderie that had been their greatest strength was strained, not by mistrust, but by a shared, unspoken fear. Late into the night, the storm reached its peak. The thousand sunny pitched and rolled on violent waves, the rigging groaning in protest. Naruto stood on the rain-swept deck, letting the wind and water whip at him. The physical tempest was a comfort, a distraction from the one brewing inside him. He had faced armies, gods, and monsters. But this insidious poison, this weaponization of public perception, was a battle he had never truly won. He sensed her before he saw her. A quiet presence, a flicker of movement near the lifeboat davits. It was Robin. She was dressed in a simple, dark traveling coat, a small, waterproof satchel slung over her shoulder. She was moving with a stealthy grace, her face set with a grim, heartbreaking resolve. She was leaving. He didn't call out to her. He just appeared in her path, a silent shadow in the pouring rain. She gasped, stumbling back, clutching the satchel to her chest like a shield. "Where are you going, Robin?" he asked, his voice low, almost lost in the howl of the wind. Her face was pale in the intermittent flashes of lightning, her dark hair plastered to her skin. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Out of your way," she said, her voice tight, brittle. "Out of everyone's way. I have to." "No, you don't." "Yes, I do," she snapped, her voice finally breaking, laced with a desperation that was painful to hear. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were swimming with unshed tears of fury and self-loathing. "Don't you see? Don't you understand what they've done? They've made you a monster in the eyes of the world. A Yonko-level threat, all because of me, because you chose to stand next to me." She took a ragged breath, her shoulders shaking. "Every bounty hunter, every marine with an ambition, every kingdom will hunt you now. Not just for the money, but for the glory of slaying the demon god. Your life, the quiet existence you had, is over. Because of me." "My quiet existence was a lie," Naruto said, taking a step closer. The rain ran in rivulets down his face, mingling with the whisker marks on his cheeks. "It was an empty half-life. I was just waiting. I didn't know for what, until I met you." "Don't say that," she cried, her composure shattering completely. "You can't put that on me. I am a curse, Naruto. Everything I touch, everyone who shows me kindness, is destroyed. I have 20 years of proof. Ohara, the families, this crew, and now you. I bring ruin. It's what I am." She tried to push past him, her movements frantic. "Let me go. If I leave, they'll stop associating you with me. The bounty might go down. You can disappear again. You can be free." He caught her arm. His grip wasn't hard, but it was unyielding. It was an anchor in the storm. "No," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he rarely showed. It was ragged, fierce. "I'm not letting you go. Why are you doing this?" she pleaded, tears now streaming freely down her face, indistinguishable from the rain. "Why are you so determined to throw your life away for a woman you barely know? Is it pity, a misplaced sense of duty? What? Because the thought of you out there, alone in the dark, hunted and believing you're a curse, is something I cannot endure." He finally roared, the words torn from the deepest part of his soul. The sound was so full, of pain and raw honesty that it seemed to silence the storm for a heartbeat. He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb gently wiping away a mix of rain and tears. His purple eyes, usually so calm, were turbulent, glowing with a desperate intensity. "Do you think I don't know what that feels like?" he said, his voice cracking. "To be the focal point of everyone's hatred. To feel like your very existence is a burden on the people you love. I lived that life for years. I carried a monster inside me, and it made me a monster to everyone else. I know what it's like. To walk through a crowd and feel 100 pairs of eyes burn into your back." He let out a shaky breath, sharing a piece of his pain he hadn't spoken of in years. "I lost people, Robin. I lost my master. I lost friends. I failed to save someone I considered a brother. And for the longest time, I blamed myself. I thought if I had just been stronger, faster, better, I could have saved them. That weight, it almost crushed me." He looked into her eyes, and she saw it all there. Not just the power of a god, but the immense, crushing pain of a man who had loved and lost on a scale she couldn't imagine. "I'm not protecting you because of some duty," he said, his voice dropping to a fierce, intimate whisper. "I'm not doing it because I'm a hero. I'm doing this for me. I'm selfish. I see you, and I see a chance to do it right this time. A chance to protect someone who deserves it. A chance to tell the entire world that they are wrong about you. And maybe if I can save you from that darkness, it'll make up for the ones I failed. His confession hung in the air between them, more powerful than any Shinra Tensei. It wasn't about her being a burden. It was about him needing to be her shield. It reframed everything. So you are not leaving, he stated, his voice soft again, but with an iron finality. He made a vow, not as a god to a mortal, but as one broken soul to another. I don't care if the whole world is our enemy. I don't care if we have to fight every day for the rest of our lives. I will not let you be alone in the dark again. I will stay by your side. That is my promise. Robin stared at him, her lips parted, her breath catching in her throat. His words had shattered the prison she had built around her heart. He wasn't saving her from the world. He was saving her from herself. He wasn't just offering protection. He was offering partnership. He was offering to share the burden of her curse until it was no longer a curse at all. The argument was over. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a wave of emotion so overwhelming it left her weak. She didn't know what to do, what to say. So she acted. She surged forward, her hands coming up to grip the front of his cloak, and she kissed him. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was desperate. It was hungry. It was 20 years of fear and loneliness and pain pouring out in a single, frantic act of connection. It was a plea and an answer all at once. It was the frantic, beautiful chaos of two people who had found their only anchor in the middle of a hurricane. Naruto froze for a split second, surprised, before he responded. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him, his other hand still cradling her face. His kiss was just as desperate, a confirmation of his promise, a testament to the profound, aching need to protect and to be seen. It was a silent, solemn vow made in the heart of the storm. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, resting their foreheads against each other. The rain continued to pour, but it no longer felt cold. The howling of the wind no longer sounded mournful. I'm not a curse, she whispered, the question fragile, hopeful. No, he murmured, his lips brushing against hers. You're Nico, Robin, and you're with me now. From the doorway to the men's quarters, two figures stood in the shadows, unseen. Zoro had been woken by the storm, his instincts on high alert. Sanji had been unable to sleep, worried about Robin. They had both seen her try to leave. They had seen Naruto intercept her. They had heard it all. Zoro leaned against the doorframe, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face. He crossed his arms and closed his eyes. The protector had just proven he was more than just a shield. He was the anchor. Sanji lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. He took a long drag, the cherry glowing in the darkness. He looked at the two figures on the deck, locked in their own world. The jealousy he should have felt wasn't there. It had been washed away by a profound, grudging respect and an overwhelming sense of relief. Robin Kwan wasn't just safe. She was happy, or she was on her way to being happy. And the man, making that happen, was willing to take on the entire world to do it. He took another drag and blew the smoke out into the rain. He turned and went back inside without a word. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to interfere. The storm broke with the dawn. The sky was washed clean, a brilliant, hopeful blue. The ship was quiet. Naruto and Robin eventually came in from the rain, drenched and exhausted, but with a new, unspoken understanding between them. They had said goodnight with a quiet look that spoke volumes, and gone to their separate quarters. When the crew gathered for breakfast, the atmosphere was different. The oppressive weight of the bounty was still there, but it was no longer a fracture point. Usopp and Chopper were still nervous, but they looked at Naruto with a new kind of awe. Nami's expression was one of quiet calculation, her mind already working on new routes, new strategies to accommodate their new reality. Robin entered the galley and, for the first time in a long time, she met everyone's eyes. There was no mask, just a quiet strength, a serene confidence that seemed to radiate from her. Naruto came in a moment later. He met Zoro's gaze across the room. The swordsman gave him a single, sharp nod. It was a look of complete understanding and approval. A silent acknowledgement of the vow he had overheard. You took care of it. Good. Luffy, oblivious to the nighttime drama but sensitive to the shift in mood, just grinned. Everyone's feeling better. Awesome. Sanji, I want extra meat. The journey continued. The bounty had changed things, but it had also solidified them. They were no longer a pirate crew with a powerful guardian. They were a single, cohesive unit, united against the world. Their shared purpose was clearer than ever. Days later, in a hidden cove, far from the shipping lanes, a small, unmarked submarine surfaced. A single figure emerged, cloaked in black. It was not a nullifier. It was an agent of a different kind. The agent presented Saint Icarus, who observed via a long-range visual Den Mushi from his sanctuary in Mary Geoise, with a detailed report. The subject, Naruto Uzumaki, shows an extreme protective instinct towards the woman, Nico Robin. The agent reported, his voice flat and emotionless. Our psychological profile, based on his actions and the whispers we've gathered, suggests he is driven by a past FAI. Lure to protect someone important to him. He equates Robin's safety with his own redemption. Icarus listened, a slow, contemplative smile spreading across his face. Excellent. His strength is his heart. A predictable, and therefore exploitable, weakness. He looked at the agent. Your analysis is confirmed. Direct confrontation is inefficient. The psychological approach is proving far more effective. But the fear of the bounty is not enough. They have weathered it. Their bonds have, predictably, strengthened. He paused, his gray eyes gleaming with a cold, cruel intelligence. We must pivot. If we cannot break them apart by threatening her, then we will break him by threatening the others. He brought up images of the other Straw Hats. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, Nami, Usopp, Chopper, Frankie. He has appointed himself the guardian of one. But can he be the guardian of all? He is powerful, but he is singular. We will no longer focus solely on the witch. We will create threats for the entire crew. Separate, disparate threats that will force him to divide his attention, to stretch his power thin. We will attack the swordsman's ambition, the cook's past, the navigator's home. We will use their dreams, their histories, their connections against them. We will make him choose, Icarus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Who will you save, demon god, when they all cry for help at once? We will show him that his promise of protection is a fool's errand in a world as wide and chaotic as this. We will force him to fail. And when he does, the guild will do my work for me. The agent bowed. Your will be done, my lord arbiter. The submarine submerged, leaving no trace. The new phase of the war had begun. It would not be a war of cannons and fleets, but a war of 1,000 cuts, aimed not at the body, but at the soul. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Arbiter's Gambit. The wind that filled the 1,000 Sunny's sails carried a new chill. It wasn't the bite of cold weather, but the frost of isolation. Since the bounty poster had blanketed the seas, every port had become a hostile shore. Eyes followed them everywhere, fearful, greedy, accusatory. Friendly taverns fell silent when they entered. Merchants, once eager for their gold, now served them with trembling hands and averted gazes, anxious for them to leave. They were no longer just pirates, they were a traveling plague. This is getting old, Sanji grumbled, leaning on the rail and exhaling a frustrated plume of smoke. They had just left an island where the local militia had tried to arrest them with rusty spears and pitchforks. A pathetic and suicidal gesture driven by the world's new favorite boogeyman story. Naruto had dispersed them with a non-lethal pulse of force, but the encounter had left a sour taste. We can't even get proper supplies, Nami sighed, looking over her dwindling inventory lists. At this rate, we'll be eating nothing but sea kings and whatever Sanji-kun can forage. Luffy, surprisingly, was subdued. He loved a good fight, but this wasn't fighting. This was sadness. They're not even mad at us, he said, perched on the Sunny's head. They're just scared. Naruto stood near the helm, watching the crew. Icarus's strategy was working. He was using the world as his weapon, turning public opinion into a suffocating miasma. He was isolating them, trying to make them ill like the monsters the posters claimed they were. It was a poison, and it was starting to take effect. The nullifiers are the key, Robin said, her voice drawing their attention. She was in the library. A massive map of the new world spread across the floor, covered in her elegant, precise notes. Naruto was with her, the two of them having spent days trying to piece together a counter-strategy. They are his agents in the field. They are not just assassins, they are an extension of his will. If we can understand them, how they operate, how they communicate, where they get their technology, we can fight back instead of just reacting. But how do we find them? Usopp asked. They're like ghosts. We don't find them, Naruto stated, his purple eyes scanning the map. We make them come to us. But on our terms. His gaze settled on a particular island marked on Nami's charts. Here, he pointed to a technologically advanced, neutral kingdom called Eidolon. It was famous for two things: its absolute neutrality, enforced by a formidable automated defense system, and its status as the new world's premier hub for information. If you wanted to know something, and had the money to pay for it, the brokers of Eidolon could find it out. Eidolon. Nami's eyes widened. That place is notoriously difficult. They don't care about pirates or marines, but they have zero tolerance for any kind of conflict on their soil. Their defense systems are said to be on par with a pacifist army. Perfect, Naruto said, a glint in his eye. A neutral ground where a direct assault is impossible. A place built on information. It's the perfect board for a different kind of game. A spy mission. Usopp's eyes lit up, his adventurous spirit momentarily overriding his fear. Are we going to use disguises? Secret codes? Something like that, Naruto confirmed. Robin and I will go. We need to move quietly. The rest of you will stay with the ship in a hidden cove. The smaller our footprint, the better. The decision was made. It was a risky gambit, but it was proactive. It was a chance to finally seize the initiative from Icarus. The island of Eidolon was a marvel of gleaming chrome and shimmering energy grids. Towers of polished steel scraped a sky filled with silent, floating transport pods. The streets were clean, orderly, and patrolled by sleek, vaguely insectoid automatons that moved with an unnerving, silent grace. The air hummed with a low thrum of contained power. Naruto and Robin walked through the city's main thoroughfare, blending in with the diverse crowd of wealthy merchants, shadowy information brokers, and eccentric inventors. They were dressed in simple, fashionable local attire, Naruto in a dark, high-collared jacket and trousers, Robin in an elegant, long coat and sunglasses. They looked less like fugitives and more like a wealthy couple on a business trip. This place feels sterile, Robin commented quietly, her eyes taking in the perfect, almost antiseptic, architecture. It's the illusion of order, Naruto murmured back, his senses on high alert. He could feel the energy grid beneath their feet, the complex network of signals passing through the air, the cold, logic-driven thought patterns of the security drones. But underneath, it's just as chaotic as anywhere else. The currency is just different. It's not belly, it's secrets. He could already feel them. Faint, familiar signatures of the nullifiers. They were here, not in force, not prepared for a battle, but spread throughout the city. They weren't hiding. They were operating in the open. Air first stop was a high-end data lounge, a place where information was traded over cups of expensive, synthetically flavored tea. As they sat in a secluded booth, Naruto closed his eyes for a moment, letting his sage mode senses expand. He wasn't just listening to conversations, he was sensing the intent behind them. The lies, the greed, the fear. They've been busy, he said, opening his eyes. His Rinnegan was hidden behind a subtle genjutsu, appearing as a normal, deep blue. They're not here to hunt us. They're spreading propaganda. Robin, using her own formidable intellect, was already reaching the same conclusion. She had subtly hacked into the local network using a datapad she'd purchased. He's right. There are news reports, public service announcements, all funded by an anonymous, concerned benefactor. They're broadcasting stories about the demon god and the Ohara witch, blaming us for recent shipping disasters, crop failures, anything they can. They're poisoning the well, but it was more than that. As they walked through a crowded plaza, it happened. A woman with butterfly wings, clearly a devil fruit user, suddenly cried out and fell to the ground, her wings vanishing in a flicker of light. A few feet away, a man whose arms were made of blades yelped as they reverted to normal flesh and bone. Panic erupted. It was random, chaotic. The powers would vanish for a few seconds, then return. leaving their users terrified and confused. The security drones immediately moved in, their metallic voices calmly instructing citizens to remain orderly. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He could feel the source. Small, localized pockets of Icarus's nullifying aura, flaring up for a moment and then disappearing. They have devices, he said to Robin, his voice low and urgent. Small-scale emitters. They're staging these power failures to create public panic. They're making devil fruit users seem unstable, dangerous. They're turning the public against anyone with special abilities, Robin realized. A chill running down her spine. It's a classic tactic. Create a problem, then present your own radical ideology as the only solution. The solution being a world without devil fruits. They were witnessing Icarus's ideology in action. He wasn't just trying to kill them, he was trying to convert the world to his way of thinking. They needed to get to the source. Their RGET was the island's central information repository, the Nexus, a heavily guarded tower that contained every secret Eidolon had ever bought or sold. Robin, with her skills, could access it, but the security was said to be impenetrable. The main servers are protected by a quantum-entangled encryption key that changes every second, Robin explained as they studied the tower from a distance. And the physical security consists of Mark IV Sentinel drones, biosignature scanners, and a pressure-sensitive floor grid. So, a frontal assault is out, Naruto stated. He looked at the tower, not at its defenses, but at its structure. At the flow of energy. But they have to have a maintenance system. A way to bypass their own security for repairs. It was a classic spy mission. Robin's intellect, and Naruto's unique senses working in perfect harmony. She dove into the city's public schematics, cross-referencing power grids and maintenance schedules. He used his sensory abilities to detect the hidden pathways. The blind spots in the drone patrols, the subtle fluctuations in the energy fields that betrayed concealed doors. They moved like ghosts through the city's underbelly. Naruto would sense a lie from a guard they questioned, and Robin would use that information to exploit a loophole in their patrol route. He would detect a hidden laser grid, and she would find the master control panel to disable it for the precise 3 seconds they needed to pass. They were a seamless unit, their trust in each other absolute. They found their way into a subterranean maintenance tunnel that led directly beneath the Nexus. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and ionized metal. As they approached the main server room, they found their path blocked by a final, formidable obstacle, a solid wall of Kairoseki, sea prism stone. Laced with a powerful electric field. Sea prism stone, Robin said, her hand hovering near the wall. It disrupts devil fruit powers, but its energy signature is unique. They're using it to power their security grid. It also disrupts chakra, Naruto noted, feeling the strange deadening effect it had on his senses. But it's not perfect. He placed his hand on the wall. He couldn't phase through it with Kamui, not with the Kairoseki interfering. But he could feel the power flowing through it. He focused, his Rinnegan spinning. He wasn't trying to break the wall. He was manipulating what was inside it. He used the human path, not to extract a soul, but to subtly interfere with the bioelectric interface of the security chief whose handprint was keyed to the system. At the same time, he used the outer path to manipulate the energy flowing from the Kairoseki, creating a feedback loop. On the other side of the wall, a control panel sparked and sputtered. The heavy Kairoseki door hissed open a few inches, its power cycling down for a system reboot. It was a window of only a few seconds. Now, he said. They slipped through the gap just as the door slammed shut and the power surged back on. They were in. The server room was a cavernous space, filled with humming towers of black crystal that stored the island's data. In the center of the room, however, was something that didn't belong. It was a nullifier device, a sleek, black obelisk that pulsed with a faint, dark energy. It was connected to the Nexus's central server, subtly corrupting and copying its data. They're not just spreading propaganda, Robin breathed, her eyes wide. They're stealing the entire database. Every secret, every weakness, every piece of leverage on every major figure in the new world. But as she approached a terminal to begin her own counter-hack, a voice echoed through the chamber. It was smooth, cultured, and utterly chilling. An impressive display of infiltration. I must commend you. Most intruders are caught in the ventilation shafts. On a large screen at the far end of the room, an image flickered to life. It was a man with immaculate white hair and the placid, arrogant face of a god. Saint Icarus. He was sitting on his simple throne in Mary Geoise, looking at them as if they were specimens under a microscope. Naruto immediately stepped in front of Robin, his body shielding her. His expression hardening into cold fury. Icarus. Ah, the demon god himself, Icarus said with a thin, condescending smile. And the Ohara witch. Together, as expected. You must understand, this was never about stopping you. It was about observing you. You've been watching us this whole time? Robin asked, her voice steady despite the shock. Of course, Icarus replied. The moment you stepped on this island, my agents tagged you with a microscopic tracer. I've been watching your every move. Your synergy is fascinating. The perfect fusion of mind and might. It's almost a shame I have to erase it. What do you want? Naruto growled, his hands clenching into fists. Want? Icarus chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. I don't want anything. I am a physician, and this world is my patient. It is sick. It suffers from a fever of dreams, an infection of ambition, a plague of free will. All this noise, this messy, chaotic striving, it is the source of all conflict, all pain. I offer the cure: silence. A perfect, clean, orderly world where no one has to suffer from the burden of choice or the pain of failure. His gaze sharpened, focusing on Naruto. Your power, the Rinnegan, is the ultimate expression of that disease. It is the power of connection, of bonds, of understanding. It seeks to bring things together. My power, the void hegemony, is its antithesis. It seeks to purify by unmaking, to create peace through emptiness. We are ideological opposites, Uzumaki. It was a declaration of war, not between two men, but between two fundamental philosophies. The peace of connection versus the peace of nothingness. A world without dreams is just a bigger cage, Naruto shot back, his voice ringing with conviction. You talk about curing suffering, but what you offer is death. A quiet, sterile death of the soul. That's not peace. That's tyranny. Icarus's smile widened. You say tyranny, I say tranquility. It is a matter of perspective. But I am afraid our debate must be cut short. He gestured dismissively. You see, this was all a lovely gambit. While you were so focused on your little spy game, you failed to notice the bigger picture. On the screen behind Icarus, new images appeared. A live feed from the Thousand Sunny's hidden cove. The ship was surrounded, not by nullifiers, but by the island's entire automated defense force. The Mark IV Sentinels, dozens of them, had their cannons aimed at the Sunny. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and the others were on the deck, ready for a fight, but they were vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The king of Eidolon is a reasonable man, Icarus explained calmly. When presented with evidence I was happy to provide, that the notorious demon god and his pirate accomplices had infiltrated his island to sabotage his defense network, he was quite cooperative. He has given your friends 1 hour to surrender you, or he will have his drones obliterate your ship. The trap was sprung. It had never been about the data. It had never been about Eidolon. It was about this single moment. About isolating Naruto and Robin and putting them in an impossible position. You have a choice to make, Icarus said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Surrender yourselves to save your friends, or let them be destroyed for your sake. Let's see how strong those bonds you cherish so much really are when they're stretched to the breaking point. He was turning Naruto's own philosophy against him. He was forcing him to choose who to protect. The screen flickered, showing the faces of the Straw Hats. Luffy's angry defiance, Zoro's grim resolve, Nami's terrified but determined expression. Naruto looked at their faces, then back at Icarus. The fury in his eyes was gone, replaced by a terrifying, absolute calm. He had been so focused on Icarus's moves that he had allowed himself to be outmaneuvered. He would not make that mistake again. You think this is a difficult choice? Naruto asked, his voice so low and cold it seemed to drop the temperature in the room. He raised a hand and made a single, familiar hand sign. Shadow Clone Jutsu. In a puff of smoke, a perfect copy of him appeared. It turned to Robin. Get the data, the clone said, its voice firm. Everything. Wipe their systems clean. I'll buy you the time. Robin looked at the real Naruto, her eyes wide with concern. Naruto, you can't fight the whole island. The real Naruto looked at Icarus on the screen. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator. Hat had just been handed the keys to the cage. He's right, Naruto said to Icarus. It's not a difficult choice. Because you've made a fatal miscalculation. He turned to Robin, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. He thinks my friends are my weakness. He's about to learn that they're my strength. He turned back to the screen, his Rinnegan glowing with raw, unrestrained power. The genjutsu hiding them had vanished. You wanted to see what happens when my bonds are stretched? Naruto asked, his voice a low promise of violence. You're about to find out. He vanished. Not with a jutsu, not with a flicker of speed. One moment he was in the server room, the next he was gone. He had used his left eye's unique ability, a personal application of the Rinnegan's space-time power. A Menetejikara. He had instantly swapped his position with a pebble on the deck of the Thousand Sunny. On the deck of the Sunny, the crew was braced for battle. So, what's the plan, Luffy? Zoro asked, his hands on his swords. We fight, Luffy declared, and we wait for Naruto and Robin. They'll be back. Just then, Naruto appeared on the deck in a blink, a pebble clattering to the floor where he had just been standing. The crew stared, stunned. Naruto. Luffy cheered. You're back. Where's Robin? She's fine. She's working, Naruto said, his eyes already locked on the army of drones surrounding them. Frankie, get ready to coup de burst on my signal. Nami, plot a course for open water. Everyone else, get below deck. Now. What? We're not gonna fight, Luffy protested. I am, Naruto said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He looked at the fleet of chrome and steel automatons. I'm going to teach this island's king and his new friend what happens when you threaten my family. He leapt from the ship, landing on the water and striding towards the lead sentinel drone, which was hovering over the waves, its massive cannon glowing as it prepared to fire. Back in the server room, Icarus watched his screen, his calm expression finally cracking. The feed from the cove showed Naruto, a single man, walking toward his automated army. Impossible, Icarus whispered. Space-time manipulation. How? Robin, protected by the shadow clone, was working frantically at the terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a whirlwind of code and decryption. He's arrogant, the clone said, watching the screen. He believes his intellect and his power make him infallible. He never considered that the real Naruto could get back to the ship in an instant. On the screen, Naruto raised a hand toward the Sentinel army. I gave you a chance to remain neutral, Eidolon, his voice echoed from the drone's own speakers, broadcast across their network. You chose poorly. He clenched his fist. Tengai Shinsei. High in the clear blue sky, something flickered. A shadow, a darkness that grew, and grew, and grew. Icarus, watching from Mary Geoise, felt a tremor of genuine fear. On the screen, he could see it. A rock, a colossal, mountain-sized meteorite, pulled from the edge of space, hurtling down towards the island of Eidolon. No, Icarus breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. He wouldn't. He would destroy the entire island. But the meteorite wasn't aimed at the city. It was aimed at the empty sea, a few miles off the coast. As the rock screamed through the atmosphere, glowing white-hot, Naruto made a second-hand sign. The first meteorite was joined by a second, even larger one, appearing right behind it. The first meteorite hit the sea. The impact was apocalyptic. A wall of water, a tsunami hundreds of feet high, erupted from the point of impact. It towered over the island, casting the entire city in shadow. The Sentinel drones, their programming unable to cope with such a cataclysm, hovered uselessly. But before the wave could crash down and wipe Eidolon off the map, the second meteorite, following the first, slammed into the rising tsunami. The force of the second impact, perfectly timed, perfectly placed, shattered the wave. It didn't destroy it, it atomized it, turning the mountain of water into a colossal, swirling deluge of rain and mist that fell harmlessly over the entire island. It was the ultimate demonstration of power and control, the threat of annihilation and the proof of restraint, all in one breathtaking, terrifying display. In the ensuing chaos, with the island's defense grid in shambles and its king likely fainting in his throne room, the Thousand Sunny, shrouded in the mist, fired its coup de burst, launching into the sky and rocketing away from the island. A few minutes later, Robin, having downloaded every last byte of Icarus's stolen data and wiped the Nexus clean, was retrieved by Naruto's clone, the two of them vanishing in a swirl of space-time to rejoin the real Naruto on the departing ship. In his chamber in Mary Geoise, Saint Icarus stared at the static-filled screen, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his throne. He had been so sure of his victory. He had laid the perfect trap. He had controlled every variable. And Naruto Uzumaki had simply kicked over the board. He had not played the game. He had shattered it. Icarus began to laugh. It was not a pleasant sound. It was the sound of a god finding his devil. Wonderful, he whispered, his body trembling with a mixture of fury and exhilarating excitement. Oh, this is truly wonderful. You are not just an impurity, Uzumaki. You are a worthy opponent. The gambit had failed, but the war had just become personal. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Sound of Silence. The data Robin had stolen from Eidolon was a weapon. It was a comprehensive dossier of Saint Icarus's operations, the locations of his hidden nullifier factories, the shipping route. As for the components of his emitter devices, and, most importantly, the political and financial weaknesses of the key officials and nobles who secretly supported his purification crusade. They finally had a way to fight back, to cut the head off the snake. Their target was a desolate, volcanic island in the latter half of the new world called Ashfall Spire. According to the stolen data, this was Icarus's primary manufacturing plant. A heavily fortified facility built into the heart of the volcano, powered by geothermal energy. It was here that his null core technology was being mass-produced. Taking it out wouldn't end the war, but it would cripple Icarus's ability to spread his influence. As the Thousand Sunny cut through the ash-gray waters surrounding the island, the air grew thick with sulfur. A plume of black smoke perpetually rose from the island's jagged peak, staining the sky. There were no signs of life, only barren rock and rivers of slow-moving lava. This place gives me the creeps, Usopp muttered, adjusting his goggles. It's perfect for him, Naruto said, his eyes scanning the bleak landscape. Isolated, inhospitable, easily defended, he turned to the crew, who had gathered on the deck. This is going to be a direct assault. Robin's data shows the main entrance is shielded by a localized nullification field, stronger than anything we've encountered. Luffy, Chopper, Robin, your powers will be useless near the entrance. You'll be on the defensive. Luffy pouted, so I can't even punch the door down. Not this time, Naruto said, his expression serious. Zoro, Sanji, you're with me on point. Your haki will be weakened, but not gone. We'll be relying on pure physical strength and skill to breach the first line of defense. Frankie, you and Usopp will provide covering fire from the ship. Target their external defenses, but be ready to move. This is a trap. Everyone looked at him. Icarus knows we have this information, Naruto explained. He's not stupid. He didn't try to stop us from getting here. He wanted us to come. He's chosen this as his battlefield. Zoro grinned, a feral, excited glint in his eye. So he's finally decided to stop playing games and fight for real. Good, Sanji said, lighting a cigarette. I'm tired of running. The plan was set. The Sunny docked in a hidden volcanic vent, shielded from sight. Under the oppressive, smoky sky, the assault team disembarked. Naruto, Zoro, and Sanji moved with swift, silent purpose toward the massive, obsidian gate built into the base of the volcano. Robin, Luffy, and Chopper followed at a distance. Their role to secure the rear and act as a last line of defense. As they approached the gate, the air grew heavy, thick with the familiar, suffocating pressure of a nullification field. Luffy grunted, his body feeling dense and sluggish. Robin felt the wellspring of her power within her dry up, leaving an empty void. This is it, Naruto said, stopping 100 yards from the gate. They know we're here. As if on cue, the massive obsidian gate slid open with a low groan. But there was no army waiting for them. The entrance was dark and empty. Standing in the center of the cavernous opening was a single figure. Saint Icarus. He was dressed in his immaculate white robes, looking utterly out of place in the grimy, volcanic landscape. He was alone. Behind him, the darkness of the factory pulsed with a faint, malevolent energy. Welcome, Icarus said, his voice echoing slightly, calm and resonant. I do hope your journey wasn't too taxing. I took the liberty of dismissing the welcoming committee. I felt this occasion called for a more personal touch. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji immediately fell into combat stances. Naruto simply stood there, his hands in his pockets, his purple eyes locked on his adversary. You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Uzumaki, Icarus continued, a slight, almost pleasant smile on his face. You've disrupted my supply lines, exposed my supporters, and frankly, made a mess of my carefully laid plans. You've forced my hand. Get to the point, Naruto said, his voice flat. The point, Icarus said, spreading his arms wide, is that I have grown tired of this game of chess. I have come to appreciate that you are not a piece to be maneuvered. You are a rival king. And a king must be met on the field of battle. He tilted his head. I have learned from my mistakes. My power is conceptual, but it requires focus. It is difficult to maintain a wide-scale nullification field and engage in personal combat simultaneously. My nullifiers were a crutch. My political games were a distraction. My true power, my void hegemony, is meant for a singular, divine purpose. The ground began to tremble. Not from the volcano, but from Icarus himself. A wave of palpable nothingness radiated from him, a pressure 1,000 times more intense than any they had felt before. The very air seemed to thin, the light to dim. The black smoke from the volcano ceased its roiling. Frozen in the sky, sound died. It is meant, Icarus whispered, his voice the only thing audible in the sudden, crushing silence, to purify. He raised one hand. Zone of silence. A dome of translucent, shimmering darkness erupted from him, expanding at an impossible speed. It swept over them, over the thousand sunny, and kept going, blanketing the entire island of Ashfall Spire in an instant. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Luffy gasped, his body seizing up. The rubbery elasticity that was the very core of his being vanished. He was just a boy in a straw hat, flesh and bone. He tried to stretch his cheek and couldn't. A wave of vertigo and a profound sense of loss hit him so hard he fell to his knees. Chopper, who had been in his sturdy heavy point, read out in pain as his body violently contorted, forcibly reverting to his smallest, weakest brain point form. The Rumble Ball's power had been completely, utterly purged from his system. Robin reached for her power out of instinct and found only emptiness. The countless arms she could summon, her second pair of eyes, her wings, they were gone. She was just an archaeologist again. A scholar. Defenseless. Zoro and Sanji staggered, gritting their teeth. The edge of their haki, the spiritual fire that fueled their techniques, was being smothered. It wasn't gone, but it was like trying to breathe through a wet cloth. Their observation haki was blind, their armament a fraction of its usual strength. Only Naruto remained standing, unaffected. His Sage of Six Paths power was not of this world. It was not a devil fruit, not haki. It was a divine energy, drawn from a source beyond Icarus's reach. You see, Icarus said, his voice cutting through the silence. In my world, there are no devil's gifts. No cheap tricks. No shortcuts to power. There is only the purity of the self. Skill, strength, and will. From the darkness behind him, they emerged. Hundreds of them. The nullifiers. His personal holy guard. They wore their same black, featureless uniforms, but they were different now. They were armed with advanced, non-explosive weaponry, blades forged from a strange, dark metal, and high-frequency vibro spears. They moved with a zealot's fervor, their eyes, visible through their new, open-faced masks, burning with fanaticism. They were at home in the silence. My nullifiers are not assassins, Icarus explained. They are zealots. Men and women who have willingly given up the dream of power for the purity of purpose. They train their bodies to the peak of human potential. They are what the world should be. The nullifiers surged forward, a silent, disciplined tide of black. They ignored Icarus and Naruto, their targets clear, the now powerless Straw Hat Pirates. Luffy, get back to the ship. Zoro roared, drawing his 3 swords. His voice sounded muffled, robbed of its usual resonance. He charged forward, meeting the first wave of nullifiers. His blades clashed against their dark metal, but his slashes lacked their usual monstrous force. He was fighting on sheer skill and muscle alone. Sanji's leg, unable to ignite, became a blur of black-suited motion. His kicks were still lightning fast, brutally effective, but he was quickly surrounded, forced onto the defensive. "Get Robin Kwan to safety," he yelled. Luffy, his mind reeling from the loss of his abilities, shook his head to clear it. He was weak, but he wasn't helpless. He was still a brawler with fists hardened by years of fighting. He charged in, joining the fray, a purely physical combatant for the first time in his life. The battle was a desperate, brutal affair. The Straw Hats were masters of their craft, but they were fighting in the enemy's world. The Nullifiers were just as skilled in pure martial arts, and they were fresh. Their numbers overwhelming. Naruto watched for a fraction of a second, his mind processing the new battlefield. His friends were in danger. The citizens of Eidolon were one thing. This was his family. His calm expression vanished, replaced by a storm of cold, divine rage. "You wanted to see me without restraint, Icarus," Naruto said, his voice dangerously low. He made a cross-shaped hand sign. "Then let me show you." Mass Shadow Clone Jutsu. The island exploded in puffs of white smoke. Not one or two clones. Not 100. Thousands. An army of Naruto Uzumakis materialized, each one a perfect, solid copy, each one radiating power. They flooded the battlefield, a tide of orange and black that crashed into the nullifiers. The entire dynamic of the fight shifted instantly. The outnumbered Straw Hats were suddenly supported by a literal army. Clones engaged the nullifiers, a chaotic maelstrom of taijutsu, Rasengan's, and elemental jutsu that Icarus's field couldn't negate. Other clones formed a protective wall around Robin, Chopper, and the path back to the Sunny. "Icarus!" The real Naruto roared, his voice booming across the island. He shot forward, a golden blur of chakra. His fist cocked back. He was no longer holding back. No more restraint. No more gentle pushes. This was about eradication. Icarus met his charge, his expression one of ecstatic excitement. Yes, this is it. The true test. Their fists collided. The impact was not a sound. It was a void. A sphere of absolute nothingness expanded from the point of their contact, vaporizing the Ak beneath their feet and silencing even the chaos of the battle around them. Naruto's fist, glowing with the power of the sun, was met by Icarus's, which was shrouded in a darkness that seemed to consume light itself. They were thrown back from each other, landing gracefully. A massive, perfectly spherical crater was all that remained where they had stood. "Your power is crude," Icarus sneered, his knuckles smoking with black energy. "It is creation, life, messy and chaotic, and yours is empty," Naruto retorted, his own hand steaming with golden chakra. "It's the tantrum of a child who won. TS to break all the toys because he doesn't know how to play." Their duel began in earnest. It was a battle of gods, a cataclysmic clash of fundamental forces. Naruto moved with the speed of a thunderclap, his every blow carrying the weight of a mountain. He spun through the air, unleashing a Rasenshuriken, a miniature hurricane of wind blades that screamed towards Icarus. Icarus didn't dodge, he simply held up a hand. A wave of his void hegemony washed over the attack, and the Rasenshuriken unraveled, its complex chakra structure collapsing into nothingness before it could reach him. It was simply unmade. Naruto's eyes widened. Icarus's power was even more absolute than he had imagined. It didn't just negate energy, it erased the concept of the technique itself. Icarus retaliated, sweeping his arm in a wide arc. A wave of shimmering darkness shot across the ground, not destroying what it touched, but erasing it. A line of non-existence cut through the battlefield, vaporizing rock, clones, and anything else in its path. Naruto leapt into the air, manifesting his golden chakra avatar, a partial Kurama form. 6 massive, ethereal arms sprouted from his back, each one forming a Biju bomb, a sphere of pure, condensed power. "Let's see you erase this," he roared, launching all 6 at once. Icarus's smile was rapturous. He clasped his hands together. "This is the chaos I speak of. The uncontrolled excess. It must be purified." The nullification field around the island pulsed, converging on him. He became a singularity of absolute emptiness. The 6 Biju bombs, each capable of leveling a mountain, converged on him, and as they entered his personal space, they imploded, collapsing in on themselves with a silent flash of inverted light, their immense energy completely and utterly nullified. The feedback threw Naruto back, the chakra avatar flickering. He was pouring immense power into his attacks, and Icarus was simply turning it off. It was like trying to drown a hole. While the two gods clashed, the battle on the ground raged. The Straw Hats, though still hampered, had regrouped. They were fighting with a desperate ferocity. Zoro, his haki dampened, abandoned his complex sword styles for raw, brutal efficiency. Each swing of his blades aimed to cripple or kill. Sanji, a whirlwind of powerful kicks, was a blur of motion, protecting Luffy as the rubber man turned. Ed Brawler learned to fight with his own two fists again. Robin, though powerless, was not helpless. Her mind was her greatest weapon. The ones with the red piping on their uniforms are squad leaders. She called out, her strategic mind analyzing the enemy's formation. Take them out, and their units fall into disarray. Usopp, Nami, their vibro spears run on a frequency. Use your dials to create a counter frequency. It should disrupt their weapons. From the Sunny, Usopp and Nami, protected by a wall of Naruto's clones, went to work, cobbling together a device. Frankie's cannons roared, his company. La-powered blasts providing suppressing fire. They were a crew. They were a family. And they fought as one, even when broken. Naruto saw this. He saw his friends fighting, bleeding, but refusing to break. He saw Robin, standing tall amidst the chaos, her voice a beacon of strategy and hope. And it fueled him. He dropped the chakra avatar, his strategy shifting. Brute force was useless. He needed to be smarter. He flew towards Icarus, but this time, he wasn't attacking. 9 black spheres, the truth-seeking orbs, materialized behind him, humming with the power of all creation. He brandished one of the orbs, shaping it into a long, sharp spear. This isn't just chakra, Icarus. This is the embodiment of all things. Yin and yang, life and death. It cannot be unmade, because it is everything. He lunged. Icarus met the spear not with his nullifying energy, but with a blade of his own, a sort of pure, solidified darkness that seemed to be forged from a shard of the night sky. Their duel became a dance of steel and shadow. The truth-seeking spear, which could disintegrate anything it touched, clashed against Icarus's void blade, which could erase anything it cut. Sparks of gold and black flew as creation and nullification met, each unable to overcome the other. They were perfectly matched. Naruto's skill, honed over a lifetime of war, was met by Icarus's own terrifying, innate talent. But Naruto had something Icarus didn't. Allies. Now, Robin's voice cried out. A high-pitched, piercing whine filled the air as Usopp and Nami activated their jury-rigged device. The nullifiers, vibro spears sputtered and died, their blades ceasing to hum. The sudden weapon failure caused a moment of chaos in their ranks, an opening Zoro and Sanji immediately exploited. At the same time, Naruto saw his chance. Icarus was momentarily distracted by the sound, his perfect concentration broken. Naruto feinted with the spear, then spun, a truth-seeking orb in his other hand expanding into a black shield that he slammed into Icarus's side. The blow sent Icarus staggering back, a flicker of pain crossing his face for the first time. The truth-seeking orb hadn't been erased. Naruto was right, but Icarus was a celestial dragon. He was a god, and gods do not stagger for long. His eyes blazed with fury. You rely on your attachments. Your flawed, sentimental connections. I will show you what they are worth. He ignored Naruto and turned his attention to the battlefield below. He saw Robin, the strategist, the linchpin of the crew's resistance. He raised a hand, a sphere of concentrated darkness forming in his palm. Aimed directly at her. Naruto's blood ran cold. He was too far away to intercept it directly. Time seemed to slow down. He could see the attack forming, see the terror on Luffy's face. See Zoro and Sanji trying to fight their way back to her. He made a choice. He threw his truth-seeking spear, not at Icarus, but at the ground between Icarus and Robin. Shibaku Tensai. The spear became a black hole. A gravitational singularity. It tore up the ground, pulling rock, debris, and dozens of the nullifier elite guard into its orbit. In seconds, a massive sphere of rock and screaming bodies formed in the sky. A miniature moon that completely blocked Icarus's line of sight to Robin. It was a brilliant move, but it left Naruto open. As he focused on maintaining the planetary devastation, Icarus was on him. His void blade singing, "You chose them over yourself." Icarus hissed, his face contorted in a triumphant snarl. The ultimate foolishness. His blade plunged deep into Naruto's side. Naruto grunted in pain, the golden chakra around him flickering violently. The wound was horrific. The void blade wasn't just cutting, it was erasing. His flesh and blood were being unmade at the point of contact. His own rapid healing was fighting a losing battle against the encroaching nothingness. Naruto! Robin screamed, her voice filled with a terror that eclipsed anything she had felt before. Seeing his objective complete, Naruto was grievously wounded, and with his elite guard trapped, Icarus made a tactical decision. His power was draining from maintaining the island W.I.'d zone of silence and fighting a being of Naruto's caliber. He couldn't win a battle of attrition. He pulled his blade free and kicked Naruto away. "This is a satisfying first victory," he declared, though his breathing was heavy. "Let this be your lesson, Uzumaki. In my world, attachments are anchors. And anchors exist only to drag you down." He began to levitate, a dark portal of swirling nothingness opening behind him. The remaining nullifiers, their ranks broken, began a disciplined retreat into the factory. Naruto, clutching the gaping, empty wound in his side, fell to one knee, his strength failing. His remaining clones, their task complete, vanished in puffs of smoke. The massive Chibaku Tensei in the sky, its core gone, began to crumble, raining rock and unconscious nullifiers down on the barren landscape. The zone of silence collapsed. Sound rushed back in. The volcano began to rumble again. And Luffy, his rubbery power surging back into his limbs with a painful rush, screamed, "Naruto!" The crew rushed to his side. Chopper, immediately shifting into his doctor form, stared in horror at the wound. It wasn't bleeding. It was a hole, a patch of non-existence that was slowly, terrifyingly, eating away at him. I can't treat this," Chopper cried, his medical knowledge useless against such a conceptual injury. "It's not a wound, it's an absence." Robin fell to her knees beside Naruto, her hands hovering over the injury, afraid to touch it. Tears streamed down her face. He had taken that blow for her. He had created an impossible choice, and he had chosen her without hesitation. Naruto looked up at her, his face pale, a pained but defiant smile on his lips. "See," he rasped, his voice weak. "Told you, I'd protect you." He reached up, his hand covered in his own golden chakra, and placed it over the wound. He was using the last of his strength, the creative power of the sage, to fight the encroaching void, to create new flesh where nothingness existed. The process was agonizing, the two opposing forces warring within his very being. His eyes fluttered, and he collapsed into Robin's arms, unconscious but alive. The battle was over. The factory was crippled, Icarus was gone. They had won, but the cost had been staggering. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Unwritten Dawn. The journey from Ashfall Spire was a quiet, tense affair. The thousand sunny I led through placid waters under a sky that seemed too bright, too cheerful for the somber mood that had taken root on its decks. The victory felt hollow, tainted by the near-fatal price that had been paid. The usual post-battle feast was forgotten, the celebratory shouts replaced by worried whispers and the anxious, rhythmic creak of the ship's timbers. Naruto lay in the infirmary, unconscious. The gaping, conceptual wound in his side had been sealed, but only through a desperate, continuous effort on his part. Even in sleep, a faint golden glow emanated from him, the creative power of his yin-yang release fighting a constant, silent war against the lingering tendrils of Icarus's void. It was a battle of attrition being fought within his very soul. Chopper was a whirlwind of frantic energy. His medical expertise pushed to its absolute limit and beyond. He had never encountered anything like this. He couldn't stitch it, couldn't medicate it. All he could do was monitor Naruto's vitals, apply nutrient-rich salves to the surrounding skin, and try to keep his fever down. He felt a frustrating helplessness that gnawed at him. Robin never left Naruto's side. She sat in a chair by his bedside, a silent, unwavering sentinel. She had cleaned the grime from his face, replaced the cool cloth on his forehead 100 times, and held his hand when his unconscious form would twitch with pain. The guilt was a physical weight in her chest, heavy and suffocating. He had taken that blow for her. The truth of it was a brand on her heart. She would look at his pale, still face, the whisker Arcs that usually gave him a boyish charm now stark against his ashen skin, and the memory of Icarus's blade plunging into his side would play over and over in her mind. The rest of the crew found their own ways to cope. Sanji chain smoked on the deck, his brow furrowed in worry, preparing nutrient-rich broths that Naruto couldn't eat, needing to do something. Zoro trained with a relentless, punishing ferocity, pushing his body to its breaking point as if to atone for his own inability to protect Naruto. Luffy sat on the Sunny's head, uncharacteristically quiet, his gaze fixed on the horizon. A grim seriousness on his face that was rarely seen. He had felt true powerlessness on that island, and he hated it. He hated that his friend had been so grievously wounded while he could do nothing. Frankie and Usopp worked tirelessly, reinforcing the ship's hull and upgrading its systems, their usual boisterous energy channeled into a quiet, focused competence. They were making their home stronger, a fortress for their fallen protector. After 3 days, they reached a place that was a secret even in the New World. It was an island chain shrouded in a perpetual, chakra-infused mist that made it invisible to log poses and undetectable by normal means. A place Naruto had found long ago and prepared as a sanctuary. It was his last resort, a place of peace in a world of war. The locals, a small, secluded tribe who practiced a form of nature-based energy manipulation, owed him a debt from years past. They called the island Ethelgard, the Quiet Garden. It was a paradise of lush, vibrant green, with waterfalls that cascaded into crystal-clear lagoons and trees that hummed with a gentle, life-giving energy. The crew anchored the Sunny in a hidden cove, and with the help of the islanders, carefully moved Naruto to a healing pavilion woven from living wood. Here, surrounded by the potent life force of the island, Naruto's condition began to stabilize. The golden glow of his healing intensified, slowly pushing back the last vestiges of the void. On the 5th day, he woke up. His eyes fluttered open, the purple ripples of his Rinnegan looking pale and washed out. The first thing he saw was Robin. Her face etched with exhaustion and worry, her hand clasped around his. She was asleep in her chair, her head resting on the edge of his bed. He squeezed her hand gently. Her eyes shot open. She looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. Naruto. His name was a fragile, relieved whisper. Hey, he rasped, his voice rough. He tried to sit up, but a sharp, searing pain in his side made him grunt and fall back. Don't move, she said, her voice firm, her hands instantly on his shoulders to keep him down. You'll reopen the wound. He looked down at his side. The hole was gone, replaced by fresh, pink scar tissue that felt strangely thin, alien. He could feel the weakness in his body, a profound chakra exhaustion that ran bone deep. How long? 5 days, she answered. We're on Ethelgard. The rest of the crew, alerted by a lookout, came rushing in. Their relief was a tidal wave of emotion. Luffy, seeing Naruto was awake, let out a whoop of joy but stopped short of his usual tackle hug. Held back by a stern glare from Nami, Chopper immediately began a barrage of medical questions, his eyes filled with tears of relief. You idiot, Sanji said, though his voice was thick with emotion. Making Robin Kwan worry like that. Zoro just stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, a single, sharp nod his only comment. But the relief in his eye was palpable. The crew was whole again. The next few weeks were a time of quiet recovery. Naruto's strength returned slowly. The island's energy, combined with Sanji's cooking and Chopper's care, worked its magic. He began to take short walks, leaning on Robin for support, a reversal of their usual roles that felt both strange and deeply intimate. During this time, the world outside didn't stop. The news of the battle at Ashfall Spire had been suppressed by the world government, spun as a catastrophic volcanic eruption caused by illegal pirate activity. But the underworld buzzed with rumors. A Buster Call level mob. Rhine force had been wiped out by the Straw Hats, demon god. A Yonko's territory had been trespassed without consequence. An entire island's defense system had been humbled. The bounties skyrocketed once more. Luffy was now a full billion. The rest of the crew were branded as the core officers of a Yonko-level threat. And Naruto's poster was updated. The epithet was the same, but the number was now a staggering 2.5 billion belly. Below it, a new line had been added, Enemy of the World. It was no longer just a title. It was an official designation from the 5 elders themselves. They talked about it one evening. Sitting on a cliff overlooking the misty sea, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery colors. Enemy of the world, Naruto said, a humorless smile on his face as he looked at his new poster. I guess I'm moving up in the world. Robin sat beside him, her arm linked through his. The physical contact had become a natural, constant thing between them. Does it bother you? She asked quietly. He was silent for a moment, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. It used to, he admitted. The glares, the whispers, the hate. I spent my whole childhood desperate for their acknowledgement. To be seen as Naruto Uzumaki, not the 9-tailed fox. He turned to her, his purple eyes clear and steady. But you know what I learned. You can't make people see you. You can only be who you are. The people who matter, they'll see you for real. The rest don't get a vote. He gestured to the sunny, anchored in the cove below, where the rest of their family were laughing and preparing for dinner. I have my acknowledgement right there. That's all I need. Robin leaned her head on his shoulder, a deep sense of peace settling over her. His journey was no longer about his lost past, and hers was no longer about a lonely future. They had found their present, here, together. A few days later, on a morning so beautiful it felt like a dream, Naruto stood with Robin on a secluded beach. The sand was white, the water was a perfect turquoise, and the air was sweet with the scent of strange, alien flowers. He had been quiet all morning, a thoughtful, serious expression on his face. He finally turned to her, taking both of her hands in his. Robin, he began, his voice a little unsteady. I made you a promise. That I would stay by your side, that I wouldn't let you be alone in the dark. You've kept it, she said softly, her heart starting to beat a little faster. You almost died keeping it. That promise, it's not enough anymore, he said, his gaze intense. I don't want to just be your guardian. I don't want to just be your partner in this fight. I want everything. I want the quiet mornings and the late-night conversations. I want to see you smile when you decipher a new poneglyph. I want to be the one you lean on when the weight of the world feels too heavy. I want to build a life with you, no matter how chaotic or dangerous it is. He took a deep breath. The words he had been practicing in his head for days suddenly feeling clumsy and inadequate. So he spoke from the heart. I love you, Nico Robin, he said, the words simple, honest, and absolute. Quote, I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you in that library, trying to be so strong while you were so terrified. You were the kindest, smartest, and bravest person I have ever known. He knelt, not with the dramatic flair of a prince, but with the humble sincerity of a man bearing his soul. He didn't have a ring. He had something better. He manifested a tiny, perfect sphere of his truth-seeking orb, and within it, he created a miniature, ever-blooming sakura blossom, its petals glowing with a soft, internal light. Marry me, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Be my wife. Be my family. Let's face the world together. Not just as allies, but as one. Tears welled in Robin's eyes, tears of a joy so profound and overwhelming it stole her breath. For 20 years, she had dreamed only of survival. Love, family, a future. They were luxuries she never dared to imagine. And now, here was this impossible, godlike man, who had seen the ugliest parts of her past and the deepest of her fears. And he was offering her all of it. Yes, she whispered, the word a choked sob of pure happiness. Yes, of course, yes. He slid the shimmering, impossible ring onto her finger. It pulsed with a gentle warmth. He stood, and she threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the love and relief and hope that filled her heart. Their wedding was not a grand affair. There was no priest, no towering cake, no great hall. It was something far better. It took place on the deck of the Thousand Sunny, at sunset, witnessed only by the 9 people who had become their world. Robin wore a simple, elegant white dress that Nami had tearfully insisted on designing. Naruto wore a formal black version of his usual attire, looking sharper and more handsome than any of them had ever seen him. Luffy, acting as captain and officiant, stood before them, a wide, proud grin on his face. So, he began, scratching his head. Naruto is super cool, and Robin is super smart. And they love each other a lot. So, By the power invested in me as captain of this ship, you guys are, like, super married now. Hooray! He threw his hands in the air. Now can we eat? It was perfect. They exchanged their own vows. Quiet words spoken only for each other, promises of a shared future against a world that had condemned them both. The crew cheered, Usopp setting off celebratory fireworks that painted the sky with smiling faces and flowers. Sanji presented a magnificent wedding feast, Zoro opened a rare and ancient bottle of sake, and they celebrated under the stars, a tiny island of warmth and joy in a hostile world. Later that night, Naruto and Robin stood on the cliff where they'd had so many talks, looking out at the endless, moonlit sea. His arm was wrapped around her waist, and her head rested on his shoulder. The glowing ring on her finger was a tiny star in the darkness. She held a rubbing of a new poneglyph, one the islanders had shown her, a fragment of a text that spoke of the dawn of the world. "Are you still determined to find the truth?" he asked softly. "To find the Rio poneglyph." Even with all this, he gestured vaguely at the world beyond their sanctuary. She looked up at him, and her smile was something new. It wasn't the small, reserved smile of before. It was a genuine, fearless, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. It was the smile of a woman who was no longer haunted. "I am," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The truth is still important. But it's not a lonely quest anymore." She leaned up and kissed him softly. "With you, I'm not afraid of what I'll find." He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. He looked out at the horizon, at the promise of a new day. His past was a world of ghosts, but it no longer defined him. Her past was a legacy of sorrow, but it no longer imprisoned her. Their adventure was now one shared story. The Arbiter was still a threat, the world government was still the enemy, but they were together. And that, they both knew, was more than enough. In the deepest, most shadowed chamber of the castle Pangaea, Saint Icarus stood before the five elders. He was wounded, a long, thin scar from Naruto's truth sea. King Orb marring the side of his face, a scar his power could not erase. He had failed to capture Robin, failed to kill Naruto, and lost his primary factory. By any measure, it was a catastrophic defeat. But he was not being punished. "You have failed, Icarus," the blonde elder said, his voice heavy. "I have succeeded," Icarus countered, his voice a low, burning whisper. "I have confirmed the nature of his power. I have seen the limits of his physical form. And I have wounded him. A god who can bleed is a god who can be killed." His eyes, once cold and placid, now burned with a fanatic's fire, a personal obsession. "My methods were too subtle. This is not a creature that can be broken by politics or psychological warfare. He is a primal force. He must be met with a primal force." He looked at the Gorosei, his expression one of mad certainty. "The great cleansing of the void century. The records are incomplete, but I have found whispers. Our ancestors did not just use weapons. They wielded a power to unmake the very laws of reality. A power granted to them from the empty throne itself. The ultimate authority." The elders stiffened. The empty throne was a symbol, a secret they guarded with their lives. "That authority has laid dormant for too long," Icarus hissed. "To erase this blasphemous light, to silence the dangerous truth of the past once and for all, a greater power is needed. The final purification requires the final weapon. Grant me access. Allow me to complete the ritual. Let me become the true avatar of the world's will." The five elders looked at each other. They were men who had dedicated their lives to maintaining balance, to preventing the world from tipping into chaos. But this Naruto Uzumaki, this living legend with the power of creation, was a weight on the scales they could not account for. He was an absolute who threatened their carefully constructed world of grays. Perhaps the only way to fight an absolute was with another. The sword-bearing elder finally spoke, his voice like the grinding of stones. "The world cannot abide two suns in one sky." He looked at Icarus, his ancient eyes filled with a grim resolve. "Very well. The time for silence has come. We will grant you what you seek." A chilling, triumphant smile spread across Icarus's face. He was no longer just a zealous arbiter. He was about to be unchained. He was about to become the apocalypse that the world had long forgotten it was capable of. The real war was about to begin. Chapter 7 End.